Namaste, everybody. We are back, and today we have Raphael with us today, and we're going to be talking about history, an important subject. I feel it's for us to, get into a little bit, and um, there's a reason why we are here. Collectively speaking, how we have arrived, and they tell you that there's a narrative that they want us to believe, and kind of scratching the surface, we come to a realization it's not exactly what they have told us, and that's just how conspiracies work, and that's just the way in which manipulation is happening. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about like what has actually happened, or what do we think actually has happened, and why are they lying about this type of stuff, and what's the end goal with it all. So I hope everybody's doing well. And Raphael, are you with us today?
I am indeed. Thank you
All
very
right.
much, Nudge. I'll just say hi briefly like this. Welcome, everybody.
Okay.
Got to be careful with the hand signs, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. None of this stuff, no triangles, no upside down triangles, no okay signs, right? We're gonna be labeled as Freemasons right off the bat, you know.
Yeah, great to be back. We'll discuss a few different things today. We'll just bring up a few links, a few ideas, mainly related to David Ewing Jr.'s recent presentations, but also potentially anything else you want to talk about, or maybe something that Chad is inspired to ask or talk about. Not that, just speaking for me, I'm authority on anything at all, but just trying to relay the information I have collated and understood the best I can.
Yeah, I mean, like nobody's an authority of anything, but what we are just trying to offer is kind of a different perspective, right? And then there's a reason why we think the way we do. And so, take it with a grain of salt or whatever, but it's always good to just question the narrative. And I think the reason a lot of us have arrived to this point, in my opinion, is that we don't really trust governments or institutions, really. I mean, and we know that they have lied to us about many subjects, just about everything. And history just happens to be one of those things that they've lied to us about. So, that's the first and foremost thing. They lied to us about it. Okay, how do we know that they lied? And if that's the case, then what will be the alternative? What else could have happened? So those are the things I think we should explore.
Precisely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's dive into it. So what would you like to share with the audience first?
I think what we should start with is simply this basic outline. So in the recent interviews, this is basically the information I would have wanted from the start, but sometimes it takes time to build up, I want to say, a narrative or just to lay the foundation. Anyone who's deeper into different topics most likely knows that a general public or many people, you cannot just hit them straight away with some idea, but you have to, I'm only gonna use Freemason terminology today, I'm sorry, but like, brick by brick, lay a foundation to give a basic understanding, just as you outlined right now, basic understanding. Oh, it is possible that authority may lie to you, as one example, and I would say in a similar way, David Ewing Jr. also has approached different topics in a certain order, let's say, to lay the groundwork to make certain things understood, especially also because, for example, with the idea of Islam, especially in Europe, maybe also somewhat in America, or with the idea of the Prophet Muhammad, usually that's, how do you call it, a red towel, like with the bulls in Spain. How do you say that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So how to gradually introduce topics and then go through them so people actually can come along, let's say. People will still always be triggered, right? But it takes some time, at least for those who are willing to understand as well, to then more and more get into a topic and understand more angles about something. For example, the idea that the Prophet Muhammad basically could be said, people love to call him prophet, but also would simply be a politician. And what happened with the Starford cities and all of these things. So in some of the
Hmm.
recent interviews, I would say the three most recent ones, which are called Jewish Quran in Pakistan, America is ruled by Muslims, and European Barbarians, Naked Truth. although also already with the series we did together, which were 3 or 4 full shows on the church bells of the devil, David, I want to say, at least in my point of view, has finally spoken about certain things I was, of course, curious about from the very beginning, but, didn't know where to start or didn't get any answers to. So maybe we would want to talk about some of those. First,
Yep.
maybe I'd simply ask if you've seen some of them or parts of them, whatever you think of it or whatever stuck out to you. And then I would just outline very briefly or in a very basic way, let's say, a few key ideas that I think are relevant here.
Yeah, just to go back a little bit, I would use the word like lure or bait, you know, as far as like the shaking of the red flag, the carpet in front of the bull. But people are led, right? People are led to a certain mentality and a certain way of thinking, and there's that's part of the manipulation that we have found ourselves in. Um, for me, I kind of like to work in terms of like I want to think about like, okay, what brought us here? What's the big picture? Like one of the questions that I would like to ask, if Raphael, is that who is ruling now? Like who the hell is actually, I mean, because I understand that, Muhammad existed and Jesus existed and there was some kind of a war that happened. And, I was listening to some of this and then, Muhammad freed people. So what's going on now? I mean, we understand that there is still manipulation and all that kind of stuff happening. So I have to think that is there a faction of good guys and bad guys that's at war behind the scenes? Like, what is your opinion about this?
Yeah, so here, of course, on the one hand, I could only speculate and I could come around with things like, Fritz Springmeier, the 13 bloodlines, and this and that.
Yep.
These are things that are known and in the public domain, right?
Mhm.
David has alluded to the idea that he has uh, an idea, let's say, or certainly, if anything, more direct or even secondary knowledge than I could have, or maybe even someone could have who is a general researcher, because understandably, you would know more about this if you have even just met individuals that are influential. One simple example he gave me a long time ago was that talking to certain CEOs, even of big companies, realizing that they are actually not able to freely decide anything by themselves, just as a simple example. Although by now, many people researching it, for example, with Elon Musk and other figures, also already have figured out that those individuals are not really the ones that are in power or that really have anything to say. And if anything at all, they are like PR individuals, or they are media personalities, or they are figureheads. And then to answer your question in the way that I understand it right now, and also this has only come about because of David's recent interviews where he's kind of been putting it together, is that there may be basically two background factions. And again, please don't take this as authoritative or definite or anything at all. But basically, it would come back to the idea, which may also be relayed in different movies, good guys, bad guys. And here also David mentioned to me, which I would can easily believe, that many of these movies actually are made by these elite groups and almost like made as an in joke, I almost want to say, or like I'm not sure how to say. Think of it, if you have so much money, you control the world, everyone is confused. Well, then you make your own media for fun, maybe even both sides. But it is interesting that in so many blockbuster movies, you do very much have very, very much recurring themes. I know one
Mhm.
example David brought up was with Transformers, which I never watched too much. Another example, also just for anyone, interesting movies to watch. Another thing he mentioned was Maze Runner. Have you ever seen Maze Runner?
I've seen one of them, I think. I think there's a
Yeah,
couple of them out there.
there's like three. I only watched them because of David's recommendation. Completely crazy.
Mhm.
But still very interesting because it touches back on these ideas like transhumanism, and also on the most basic sense, always the most basic question, which is whether my agenda is to simply enrich myself, confuse and poison everybody else, and make
Mhm.
sure basically that my elevated status remains as such because I'm suppressing everyone else. That would be
Mhm.
one group on a, how should I say, spiritual, metaphysical level, but of course, this is also practical. And then the
Mhm.
other group would be the group that has, believe it or not, a genuine interest in actually developing the world, in
Mhm.
sharing and producing resources, having people that are not privileged get clothes and shoes and
Mhm.
education and all of these things. Of course, this gets more complex when then within that process, you have all types of. So, if we are to assume there would be two, let's say, background elite factions, one which seeks to oppress and basically turn the world back to a state where you have a few lords and everyone else is a peasant or a beast
Mhm.
and literally treated as such and unable
Mhm.
to move up or do anything about it. Another group that wants to uplift the general population, actually share resources and technology. Um, so it may well be that we have these two groups in the back, but what complicates things, let's say, is that even if these agendas are being pursued in the back end, let's say, or with people that, for whatever reason, really have something to say, then of course you have all types of other people which are more in front, starting with the most famous people we know, which are figureheads, and then all types of mid and lower level businessmen and whoever starting their own companies, trying to scam a bit here, trying to scam a bit there, which then, of course, may complicate the, how should I say, flawless execution of these plans. So, for
Mhm.
example, as I'm now thinking of educating someone, let's say, just as a role play,
Mhm.
I'm a big shot important elite. I want to educate a particular country or a particular class, millions in the country. I'm starting to do that, but then still all kinds of mid and low level businessmen may come in and they may slip all kinds of BS into the textbooks, which maybe wasn't even my original intention. But I let it play along because that's how it's easier to make it happen, or that's how I can ensure that it will actually, the rollout will be as big as I want to if I know I have these business partners or whoever else executing it, and they add their own, let's say, flavor to it, which may not necessarily 100% be in line with my original intention. So that's kind of makes it more difficult. And one thing that also seems to be confirmed by this is many people, whether within the elites or whether anybody you and I know, people are overly concerned with their worldly status and overly concerned with money. So of course that also comes in big time. So anything where money can be generated or scammed off of people, you have all kinds of individuals, at the ready, let's say, to do it. And I'm just thinking of one very recent example. Maybe I'm not sure how big it was in America actually. Just to get a recent example, did you have any? Oh, you weren't even in America back then, but even elsewhere, did you have any type of corona testing where you were during this time?
Yeah, well, that happened when I was in India, and actually, somebody had sent, you know, a doctor and a policeman to my hut when I was. So I left Nepal just before Indian and the Nepalese border like closed. So I was like super lucky. And then once I crossed over, I went straight to my hut, and I was just kind of hanging out there. And people heard about like, oh, I came from Nepal and I'm Asian and everybody knows I'm like, staying in a hut in a village or whatever. And then they're
This
like,
is so
like,
racist.
it's like, like go test that guy, like he's, he might have mingled around with like Chinese because Nepal is right next to China though too, and who the hell knows, everybody's like you should go test. Even the villagers, they were like telling me like you should go to a doctor and test. I'm like, I'm not going to get tested. I'm sorry, like and they're like, okay, well we're gonna probably tell. And so they had a boy, a local village boy who brought like a doctor and a police, and they're like hiking up this mountain. I saw them coming, like, ways, and I'm just like, oh, fuck's sake, like this is gonna happen. And then they come, and then we like talk for like half an hour, and they're like, you need to get tested. I'm like, how are you gonna test me? I'm not gonna jab anything up my nose or anything. And finally they convinced me to come out and like, okay, if you're gonna test. And so the doctor used the stethoscope to test me, to test my breathing. Meanwhile, both of those guys are like breathing heavily because they just climbed a mountain, and then they're like sweating, and I'm looking at them like, you can't even breathe, and I live up here. Like, what the hell you guys are even talking about? And they checked my breathing, and I was healthy. and they're like, okay, you're fine, and then they left. So that was the only testing that I ever,
This should have been
endured.
the test for everyone, actually. Like, can you breathe? No? Okay, stay at home for a bit, obviously you're not so well, or drink some tea. That's amazing. That's the type of testing they should have done. But
Yeah,
so that's the example I wanted to bring. Of course, with this method, nobody could have scammed a lot of money. But here,
yeah,
in Austria, especially, and Germany, the testing was huge. I think in Austria,
yeah, yeah.
technically, you had the most testing per capita even. And
Wow.
every week in TV, you had, oh, and it's so good. We have this testing company and we need just more tests and tests. And anyone who understands this more understands that this in itself was already, how should I say, more than highly questionable. We're not going to get into virology today, but anyone
Right.
who knows this knows anyhow it's all, super big
Yeah.
joke. But here, just the point being that many individuals, of course, then realized, oh, the government wants us to do testing centers and was kind of incentivizing this. So the
Yep.
government was shelling out millions upon millions for any, I want to say any hobo, no, don't want to denigrate anybody, but any anybody who could put up a tent or whatever else, especially in the beginning. And now years later, the government actually is coming back and is like, oh, did you maybe take too much money? Or what you have in many cases also, not even discussing about the veracity of the testing itself, but that
Hmm.
individuals even set up testing centers and just didn't do any tests, or they just put something into it. Or even I heard a more like underground report, like videos from one of the most important testing, not center itself where you get tested, but like laboratories, let's say.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
somebody had filmed in there what actually happened. And it's insane because not if they wouldn't have enough money, but they literally had all kinds of only students on, like, little to not no salary, but very low salary,
Hmm.
unskilled, untrained workers. Stuff was laying around everywhere. It was the coffee machine was moldy and stuff like that. And that was like the biggest laboratory. How do you call it? Not laboratory, but whatever, where they verified the tests for Vienna
Yeah.
or even for whole of Austria. So that's just wanted to give an example that no matter what someone tries to execute, even though I don't see that the lockdowns in themselves were, I mean, everything has a silver lining, I guess. But, making people scared, locking them in their homes and so on, generally, I don't see as a very positive thing in itself. But whatever, whoever may have started the agenda on the higher level, of course, you have all these people, like I said, at the ready to scam out even more money and to exacerbate the situation potentially and
Yeah.
to make it worse. So that's just as a recent example.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like there are repercussions or, unforeseen events, unforeseen consequences that they have certain kind of intention to scam money out of people or scare people or something like that. But like people are like herding cats, you know what I mean? And people are, as you say, like on the ready to go and be a part of the scam or whatever because like, oh, you're gonna spend money for this? Okay, let me participate, and let's um, set up tents and everybody can line up and do whatever, But it's again, we have to work with narratives and we have to work with what is true and what is not true. Does it exist or does it not exist? And if it does, then what does it do to you? Like again, not to go into virology and all that kind of stuff, but like, like at this point, like, what did you come to understand about the whole situation? We've had many years now to come to certain understanding about, terrain theory or germ theory. I mean, not to go back to that because you should have already done your homework, but there are things like the Cox postulates and, all that stuff. So go ahead and do the research that you need to catch up, really. You need to kind of have an understanding of what the hell was that all about. And then still the narrative is still going on. Actually, it's kind of like, let's flare that up again and then get people scared up again. I'm hearing through the grapevine that people are like, oh, this is going around. I'm like, holy shit, are we back to this again?
It's absolutely ridiculous. And even here, also last year, of course, with the whole Earth research topic, we've come to love the false dichotomies. And this one for me is one of the best, wet market pangolin or Wuhan, China China virus, yes. And
Yeah.
the one thing even was more or less banned to be said all the time or for many years on most mainstream. And now I'm not sure how it is on CNN by now, if CNN also says it's a China virus, but now you're allowed to talk about it. But why are you allowed to talk about both of these things? But the third option, or just the idea that it's something else entirely, gets completely swept under the rug, of course. So we're familiar with that concept by now.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Well, and this is not to go into that topic too much, but because, it's just a snippet of all the agendas that are kind of being played on us, on humanity. And there are factions that are involved. There are people who are responsible for this. The news, the academia, the government institution, they're all responsible for this, and so somebody came up with this and formulated it and passed it on, and then everybody got on board with it. So that's what we had to deal with.
Yeah, and what's clear is that this, and also it relates to the research, of course, done by David and the historical research, because what is it called? It is called COVID-19. It's not 20, it's not 21 or
Yep.
whatever. They could easily have said it. It had to be 19. And also, there was a Sailor Moon episode in 92 or whatever that foreshadowed this. Were things from the 60s which foreshadowed this. And it
Hmm.
seems, also from what I understand, that certain individuals at least were in the know. Or even if we just
Hmm.
look at the patents and so on, which were filed, 10, 15 years earlier, probably also by stooges and mere spokespersons. But still, it's quite obvious, there is a trail for this. I think one of those who did good research on this is Dr. Dave Martin, I believe, who could like kind of show there is a track of how this, of course, didn't come about randomly and wasn't just prepared for a year or two with these exercises, but for a long, long time. And we
Hmm.
can assume many things happening also today or in a similar way. Not saying that every plan that is made always is followed through and works out the way that whoever intended it to work out. But I think it is important, whilst we are presented with many apparently completely, I want to say, obviously appearing stupid individuals. On the one hand, let's say as spokespersons and front and politicians, on the one hand, it's always the questions, are they just acting really well? Just as an example with Bush Jr. especially, because
Hmm.
I also wasn't so hip to that, but it seems that this guy actually is pretty smart and he's a pretty good actor, and
Yep.
that he knew how to appear like a bumbling fool. So
Hmm.
that's the one thing. And then even if some of those individuals really literally are retarded, for lack of a better word, who's still in the back leading them on anyways?
Right.
What is their real position? What is the thing? And then often what people love to say about so-called conspiracies or things not appearing or not being the way they appear, people love to say, oh, never explain with malice what you could explain with ignorance. Well,
Hmm.
whose malice and whose ignorance, right?
Yep.
So also don't be so ignorant not to understand that it may be appearing as ignorant, just like politicians even today still say, oh, we didn't know, we didn't know, we didn't know, um, when it actually may be malice or just greed, or like I think pointed out last time, what's it called? I think Hanlon's law. Never explain, or the expanded version of this, never explain with ignorance or malice, or with ignorance what could be explained by uh, moderately motivated or informed individuals in a complex system. And I'm butchering the quote now, but mainly saying that the money incentive, for example. So there's
Yeah.
so many different things here. Also, many people don't need to be in on it to be important players on it,
Yep.
just because they see the opportunity to gain personally.
Right, right, yeah, chaos is a ladder, right? And like if there's a confusion and stuff like that, somebody is always going to take advantage of the situation. So you don't necessarily have to attribute it to some randomness or whatever or ignorance, but like somebody can ride that wave, and I read somewhere, I don't know, I don't remember where I read it. I think I might have heard it, but like Bush Jr., George W. He had like over 140 IQ, and I was really surprised because, like, everybody just assumed like, oh, these people are stupid, and he sounds like such an idiot. Yeah, but these guys are actors. You have to understand, and they're performing on the biggest stage the world has to offer. I mean, these actors on the stage of politics are, there's more pressure on them than like Tom Cruise or anybody else, because they can cut scenes and they can do retake, but they have to go on live camera and be able to perform in front of people. So it requires a higher level of maybe intelligence or performance or something, but you have to be intelligent in order to be able to do that to a degree, whether you agree with their narrative or not. Okay, so what do you got for us here? You want to? I'll bring it up.
So what my suggestion would be, I hope, let me
Yep.
tell me briefly if you can hear this.
Okay.
Can you hear something or no?
You're not playing it, are you? I don't hear anything myself.
Okay, that's
Can
no
you
good.
guys hear?
Then I have to find another
Well, you can send it to
way.
me. Maybe you can
Oh,
send it to
okay.
me, and then I can try to
Great.
play it.
Okay, great. I'll do that momentarily. So what my suggestion
Yeah.
would be basically is we simply listen to the introductions, because David started
Okay.
doing, I think, pretty concise introductions to these videos,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll listen to them one by one. We have 3 videos in
Yep.
total, and
Mm-hmm.
after each one, we can briefly talk about it, and then maybe
Mm-hmm.
give some insight, ideally.
Sounds good. I will present the first one that you sent me, and then
Perfect.
we'll
Thank
play
you.
the introduction, and then we can talk about it. Okay. All right. So hopefully everybody can see this, and let's see if you can hear it.
So they created the constitution, the secret rulers. Who did they represent? Who were they working for? Anti-Zionist Jews. They came with the Quran. They created an Islamic country. They forced all the non-Muslims to leave. Two sides are fighting each other of who's going to rule the world in the New World Order.
Okay. Is that good enough, or should I play more?
That's good enough. And since this was short, maybe actually also play the second one.
Sure. Sure. Let's see. Let me grab it, and then let me share.
In this episode, we will look at the basics of the European Masonic Muslims who built America before many Europeans went to live there, and the truth about the future Messiah king known as Moshiach to the Jewish people, or the Caliph to the Muslims, or he is known as the King of the World or the King of the New World Order. Yes, we will also look at the question of where is the true Torah of the prophet Moses.
Oops.
And will the true Torah of the prophet Moses be revealed by the Messiah, Moshiach, or the Caliph, or the King of the New World Order? And who is the Moshiach or Messiah, King of the New World Order? We will also look at the question of the Antichrist, known as the Dajjal to the Muslims, and where did these stories or these hadith actually come from, and are they true or false? Or are many of them actually true, and did they come from Europe? Yes, the story is going to be made simple in this video. We will also look at the symbol of the star and the moon, which is found on the Turkish flag or the Islamic flag. Is it really an Islamic symbol, or does it hold the secret of ancient Northern European history? For example, many people don't know that it was actually a flag that was used in places like Belgium and Holland. And also in this video, we will look at the 7 laws of the Prophet Noah, which are also known as the Noahide laws, and why many people want to bring this into the New World Order. Also, we will look at the history of the Islamic Masonic Ottomans of Pakistan, who they are, and why does nobody know about it. But the biggest thing that we're going to look at, yes, is the European Masonic Muslims, who are Northern Europeans, white people, who built America before many Europeans went to live there. Who are these European Masonic Muslims, and why does nobody know about them?
Okay,
Perfect.
that's a lot to deal with. So I mean, you know, it's where should we start? I mean, that's a lot to chew on right there. With that.
Yeah, so two parts. The one thing is about Pakistan, and the reason this was brought up is simply because it appears to be a good case example. What I would like to do, actually, I'm going to do it right here because this I can present myself as well,
Hmm.
is basically referring back to these two groups. And again, I'm not giving any definite statements here, but just my
Yep.
rudimentary understanding of what could be going on here and what I have learned from David so far. So I've shared the screen. Exactly, perfect. So basically, people always wonder about, oh, it's the Jews, or is it, or I don't know, what other group could it be? And it's quite interesting because the way David explains it is that there is something to do with the term we would call Zionism, although this also is eerily close to the word Sunniism. And again, I
Hmm.
only learned this through David. So almost it seems two sides of the same coin potentially, or almost like, are we going to use the same word and maybe do different things? Um, the baseline idea here again being that you have two groups, and what has to be said also is within the recent presentations by David, he basically divulged or proposed, let's just say, the idea that until only 150 years ago, most people were living outside the so-called Stafford city walls, had no clothes, no culture, no religion, and no
No
resources,
language.
basically, no
Yeah.
technology, thank you, no language. And some of those examples can even still be seen today in certain parts of Africa, maybe in certain parts of Asia. And this kind of helped me to understand why even today I was always wondering, why do people say this? Oh, there's cannibals here and there, or certain parts in India. You can even see
Yep.
online, there's some, they're more cultured, but they still openly say, yes, I'm eating a dead guy or whatever. Yeah, like they're not
Yep.
necessarily killing someone for it, but that is still a real thing that's going on.
Yep.
And he's kind of relating this idea that this happened a lot outside the city walls, and that inside the city, you had just a few nobles or royal Christianity, original, however religion you would call it, from wherever or whatever reason, from the time of King Solomon or whatever, they had technology. And
Hmm.
outlining it very briefly would be the idea that you had these star fort cities all over. They were trading with each other, but mainly trading with Constantinople, which is current day Istanbul.
Hmm.
And all they did was keep their small star fort city safe. They had maybe, one family that literally was the royal family of that city or that castle, which actually very much aligns with the even modern depictions of, medieval fantasy. You have the one royal family, oh, they're so important, and everybody else is just there to serve them. And even those who are allowed to serve them are the only ones allowed to live inside the city walls. And the only difference is that instead of the fantasy medieval depictions where everybody has clothes and so on,
Hmm.
in the way David lines it out, this would only have been accessible to the working class within the Stafford cities. And anyone
Hmm.
getting any type of scrap of clothes is only because they do farming for them or something else. Anybody else outside doesn't get anything. No food, no nothing. And if they come across anything, then the Stafford city rulers are going to ride out with their 50 knights and take it back. So
Yeah.
you can't do any agriculture, you can't have any farming, you can't have any animals or anything like that. Then what appeared to have happened is you had this lineage of so-called prophets or politicians, starting with Moses, at least the individuals we are aware of, then Jesus, who actually managed, or who had this honest interest apparently in democratizing, I want to say, or distributing the technology, maybe also because I almost want to say the proper word, I guess, would be half breeds or even bastards. So it's quite possible
Hmm.
that this is also because they already, for some reason, intermarried. The other, maybe with the peasants or whoever else was outside. This also reminds me of the story in the Bible where they say, oh, the giants came down from the heavens or something and made it with the regular folk, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
instead of having this from somewhere up above, well, maybe it was just up above the mountain in the Starford city. I don't know, but I'm just saying this
Hmm.
reminds me of that story. So then you had the first progression. Certain of the Starfort cities were conquered. However, then this so-called royal Christianity, which Moses and Jesus led on, eventually became corrupt within itself and again started suppressing the people. And then ultimately, eventually, you had the prophet politician Muhammad with his allies and whoever else was supporting him, who may himself also have been again, intermarried somehow, so connected to these elite families himself, but had the strong conviction that everyone should have access, and not only Constantinople should be the only flourishing city and the few Starfort families, but that everyone actually deserves to live a cultured life or to have clothes and things like that. And here what we have now, why I'm pointing out Chaim Weizmann, this may potentially be a most recent example with the creation of Pakistan, and also, I guess, related to the creation of modern Zionism, where you see again these two sides making their moves, let's say. And on the one hand, you would have Chaim Weizmann, who as you can see, says Zionist. He was leader who served as president of the Zionist organization, and later, even here you have it, I didn't even know that, as the first president of Israel. Yeah. Also instrumental in the Balfour Declaration. So this, without being able for me to understand or summarize all of the details, but this, as I understand, would have been the spokesperson or stooge for the, how do we call them? I like to use the terms by dog journalist, even though I recently discovered, maybe we'll get into this later, that I can't really trust him either. But he always likes to say X protect and X share. Or we can just call it, what would be the proper word? One thing is, again, hoarding information and technology, and the other thing would be distributing it. So this side would be the one that wants to hoard it and to keep control and to keep confusing individuals. And whom you would have on the other side would be Muhammad Assad, Leopold Weiss, who, although there's also many things about his story that are fudged, it's likely that he didn't write the books that are attributed to him and so on and so forth. But it may basically be that he was the one executing or being the figurehead for a type of a counter movement, in this case with the creation of Pakistan. As we understand, even today, Pakistan is very important, not only for cotton production, but it also seems to be one of the strongholds of Muslim faith, maybe even of the Sunni variety. And why is this important? Because with Sunniism, again, mainly looking here at the cultural effects, let's say, the mosque is open to everyone. Everyone is being taught to learn to read the Quran, where you're being taught to wash yourself, to dress, and to marry, and so on. So, and if we juxtapose this with a position of no culture, no language, no clothes, no technology, then the Quran actually contains quite a lot of ideas that would be considered revolutionary to those within the Starfort city walls that only aim to protect and hoard this idea and don't want to give anything or any scraps to anybody. So from this point of view, it can be seen that the Quran is, in that framework, a revolutionary book, let's say, a revolutionary chant, maybe the better word to say it. And that whilst on the one hand, you had the setup of Zionism with the modern state of Israel, on the other hand, you had the setup of Pakistan with a strong Muslim stronghold. And the way David explains this is basically that in the back end, you have these families, which are all elite families. However, they do not directly attack or try to kill, let's say, each other. But what they do is they simply play on the board game that is the world and basically say, well, let's see what you can do. Oh, let's see what you can do. You think you're going to succeed with your Zionism in this variant and suppressing the people? Well, go ahead. I'm not going to attack you directly. I'm going to have nice meetings with you. But at the same time, with my faction that is interested in actually having people prosper or having them have shoes and whatever else, we're going to set up our own state, more or less. Maybe it's not next to it with Pakistan, but we're going to make our own moves. And this is
Yeah.
one way, maybe, how the world stage can be a little bit more understandable if we see that in the back end, there is kind of a, how should I say, a standstill in terms of not threatening each other directly, but then you're playing
Yeah.
on the board game that is the world. Because as the elite, you have access and may have had access a long time to certain technology. It is unclear where exactly they have it from. Sometimes it is said it is from the time of King Solomon. Also here it's unclear what technology did he have, what type of maybe even energy technology. My question still is, are the mosques and modern churches, if they were all redesigned, why do they have the water basins? Were they here for water distribution, water purification, maybe also some type of energy production, however, only
Mhm.
available to the elite? But then clearly, if you have all of that tech and it is up to you to what extent you want to let anybody know about it, you are already an in-group within the elite, even if the elite itself is maybe split in half, but already you have a, how should I say, special bond within that group.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really fascinating, and to me, it makes a lot of sense. And also the fact that it's a kind of like a battle of ideologies. It's a battle of strategies, and let the man who come up with the best strategy win. Really, and we are all kind of partaking in this, whether you're manipulated by this group or that group, we are also a participant of the reality that we have found ourselves in. And I think it's being played out in other conspiratorial um, circles. I mean, I see it within the quote unquote flat earth community as well, of different factions, and they're kind of strategizing in different ways to, either gatekeep or to obfuscate or tell the truth. And I can see it in politics as well. So it's a battle of ideologies, and then at the end of the day, who is right and who is wrong, and who is going to win and who's going to lose.
Exactly. Another thing this reminded me of, even though also here I'm using the terms merely symbolically, with God and the devil. When they
Mhm.
say that the devil or God kind of says to the devil, well, you can play as you like. And the devil
Mhm.
says, oh, we're going to compete. Who is going to catch the most souls? And they're not
Mhm.
directly fighting each other, but yeah, they're vying for souls. And
Yep.
even though it may have nothing to do with the transcendental supernatural aspect of God and devil, but it may well be that these are the two groups within the elite that are playing according to that framework.
Yeah. Well, I do believe that there is a spiritual aspect to all of this, in my personal opinion. And but on top of that, it is being manifested in the material form, and that again, like it's about convincing people. Hey, does the end justifies the means? What is right and what is wrong? What is moral and what is immoral? Like, are you going to go down the line of like do whatever that you want? Are you going down the line of like, hey, you can make the world any way in which that you want it to be. This world is that's the transhumanistic way of thinking it, and then there's other thing. It's like this is reality is created by God, and then you submit yourself to that truth, I suppose. I mean, that would be just a simplistic way of explaining it, but I mean there is a kind of a fine line between one and the other as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, I would agree. And it's also almost, how should I say, I want to say funny. I'm not sure if it's funny. Maybe it's funny. But just as you say, that
Amusing.
there is amusing it, that there is this correlation actually. So even though we may only speculate about the supernatural and transcendental aspects, it seems that this is exactly what is being played out. And in this way, in a
Hmm.
certain fashion, everyone actually is participating in this game. If this is occurring, this game of the elite, simply by their own daily choices, and whether or not they for themselves purely act out of they always call it self-interest, which I think is retarded, but it's a how should I say, it's really a matter of perspective. Because
Yeah.
even when you consider this, you have so and so much money and all that wealth and so on, I'm always asking the question, are you really secure? Can you really ever be safe if you don't uplift and educate everyone else? Because how can
Hmm.
you be sure you're not walking down the street and some crazy guy's hitting you over the head, you know, because you made them crazy and insane and poisoned them? Yeah. And even
Yeah.
if you have your secret island and so on, can you be 100% sure not someone eventually is going to build a boat and come over somehow, and your
Right.
electricity is failing or something like that. And why the current state or maybe even stalemate exists, according to the way that David explains it, but from what I understand, a lot of it is supported by the works of Professor Anatoly Fomenko as well, is basically the successful crusade of the prophet politician Muhammad against the star-forged cities, because that released a lot of technology. And I mean, even today, half the world, in terms of population, maybe even more, is Muslim. They are aware of the Quran. They are aware of these ideas that, on the one hand, in a sense, accuse the transhumanists and so on. And on the other hand, also, it gives them all at least the very basic of culture, language, and sanitation, which, according to David's understanding, previously these people simply did not have at all. So if we
Mhm.
consider that, then a lot of people actually were uplifted, even though we would say still, oh, they're so poor, they're living in the desert, whatever. They don't have much food or anything else. But still, if they pray 5 times a day, they wash their face, they're wearing clothes, it's a
Yep.
big difference from being naked in a jungle without language.
Yeah, 100%, without a doubt. I mean, like, language is important, and that is very much needed to have a quote unquote evolution of the consciousness. I mean, like, try to imagine yourself with nothing. You're just naked. You would be a beast. And people are eating people, and digging in the dirt, and you got no tools to work with. I mean, that's what these people did to other people. They just like left them out to rot, and devolve more or less. And if they try to do anything at all, they sent their. I mean, if you think about a knight, you got armor and horses with metal and swords and stuff like that. One knight can kill 100 peasants. I mean, it's a technology of sorts. So the technology was used and is still being used to control population. And they're just coming up with frequency. Now it's about frequencies and light and lasers and stuff like that. But it's no different back in the day. Like 500 years ago, you had like knights with like armored horses and armors themselves, and then like all these peasants with sticks. You're not going to be able to compete with that.
And although this is something that's still an open question, I once saw some paper, but I lost it and I don't remember the name, about electroacoustic weaponry from the late 18th century, if you can believe it, maybe also backdated or not. David
Mhm.
at one time hinted that this may relate actually to the trumpets, which is quite
Okay.
interesting. That trumpets are so popular and associated with royalty because there may have been some type of electroacoustic weaponry, maybe even associated in bringing down the Starford walls. We haven't completely talked about that or explored that yet, but I find that
Mhm.
highly curious. The other thing
Mhm.
that comes to mind is, of course, Valyrian steel. No, sorry, I
Mhm.
mean Damascus steel.
Right.
Here we can again see it being reused in modern tropes, and at least my belief is that people are so drawn to these stories like Game of Thrones, of course, because it's made to be big, of course,
Mhm.
but also because it actually does contain aspects of real history. And in
Yep.
this case, Damascus still would have again be a technological advantage, which maybe, if I remember this correctly now, would have been accessible to, let's say, the Mohammedan faction, and also given a significant, power shift. But it's also certain that, of course, if you're the one who's interested in uplifting individuals, you will be able to conscript and enlist many, many more than just a few Starford city dwellers that, yeah, they can enlist a few knights because they pay them well and clothe them and feed them.
Mhm.
But if the masses are still left without anything, of course, the other side will have an easier time rallying them and being like, look, let's break into the walls and let's have everyone have clothes and
Yep.
farming and things like that. So that's something interesting to me here. Just to be clear, I'm not completely making this up. So, or let's say I'm remembering this correctly. Here you have Muhammad Assad called, even here, isn't that funny? How can you be born Leopold Weiss and then your name is Muhammad Assad? I mean,
Mhm.
what kind of
Mhm.
a relabeling is that?
Yeah.
Um,
He's the first Pakistani as well, right?
exactly. And what you have here, so it's even on the very front here, you have So in mandatory Palestine, so this is the British Mandate of Palestine, Weiss engaged in arguments with Zionist leaders like Chaim Weizmann, voicing his reservations about some aspects of the Zionist movement. After traveling across the Arab world as a journalist, he converted to Sunni Islam in 1926, and then adopted the name Muhammad Assad. And Assad, of course, being the Arabic rendition of his root name Leo. Oh, now how nice. Lion. I didn't even catch that.
Yeah.
Okay, but this is how
That's
it makes
awesome.
sense. Yeah. Cool story, even though some of it is correct, but still spokesperson. Yeah, he was the very first Pakistani citizen. He was the very first individual to get a passport. So already here you can kind of tell you cannot be any type of random guy, come up and create a state. You need elite connections, otherwise you are not allowed to create a state, at least not in this current world. You know, that doesn't exist. So you can understand he's a spokesperson for the elite. He was, here you see, director of the Department of Islamic Reconstruction, then officially Minister of Foreign Affairs, and then for Pakistan, Minister Plenipotentiary to the United Nations. So it appears that he was the counterpart of Chaim Weizmann during that time. And also here I would assume, because I'm not exactly sure what they even claim the Zionist movement is, that this does not necessarily directly relate to the specific goal of Zionism in terms of creating Israel and so on. I would, this is only my assumption now, this would only relate back more to the idea of the Noahide laws, actually. And what we may do here, if you like, is in the America is Ruled by Muslim video, which we will discuss a little bit more in a bit, we could play the part from minute 6:50. It's just 2-3 minutes where we hear all the interesting rabbis talk about their ideas of Noahide laws.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do that. Let me go back to present, and then let me actually get rid of yours first, and then I can do this, and then we'll go to minute 6:50, and then let's take a listen.
Since the fall of Moscow. Yes, well, anyway, play this video.
All right.
The Mashiach will come. There'll be a new world order.
In order for Mashiach to come, you cannot have any other governments. It's going to be one kingdom, one malchut, one government. So you can look at it in the negative aspect of it, saying a new world order, a one government. Yeah, you're right. It is going to be a new world order. The new world of Mashiach with one order, the Torah, one government. Yeah, it's going to be a Sanhedrin. We're not going to have all the rest of the stuff. The time of the entire planet is done.
For Mashiach to take over the world, don't forget, at a certain point, King Mashiach should be ruling the whole world. They themselves, the nations of the whole world, will ask him and beg him to take over their, at least the government, their government, to teach them the right way, to teach them how to live. The whole world will take him upon themselves as the leader. And then actually going to be a new world order, but not like those radical ones think. There's going to be a new world order, but the new world of God order.
Before Mashiach comes and a new world order is instituted, we need to destroy what existed previously. And we need a destruction of society and the world as we know it.
Every new reality means a total loss of the reality that came before it, referring to the coming of Mashiach and the new world order that comes with it. Okay? In other words, for what is coming, what is has to be unrecognizable. Nothing can remain. None of the world systems can remain. Nothing will remain because it's rotten to the core.
The spiritual heirs of the Roman Empire is the Western world, United States of America, so the USA will last until Mashiach comes.
Someone has to completely destroy this world and its system before the new one comes in. You want your one world government? So does God, no problem.
God will abolish every government on earth and hand over control of the whole world to Mashiach.
Mashiach will be the king of the entire world. There will be a monarchy restored to the world. Mashiach will be king, and he will be accepted by both the nation of Israel and all the nations of the world alike.
You may be wondering why Hashem wants to destroy his world, why so much destruction, so much nuclear bombs and so forth. Before a new world is built, the old has to be destroyed.
Okay, so that is the video. So we're talking about the second coming, I guess, and Moshiach, and also the Antichrist. Antichrist conversation to me is fascinating. I really like think about, and one of these channels that I do follow is called the New Earth channel. I'm not 100% in agreement with Sylvia Ivanova, but I like a lot of the ideas that she does share. And as far as like prophecy is concerned, and the coming of Jesus and the Antichrist, that's a conversation that a lot of people are having, of the end times and the tribulations and all this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of programming that is there, a lot of programming, it's entangled with religions. We're talking about Islam and Christianity and Judaism as well, like, and even Hinduism. They talk about the Maitreya. The Maitreya is another kind of figure that they're expecting that will be coming, Maitreya, and there was another word for it. It's escaping me right now. But go ahead. What are your thoughts?
Yes, so I think this lines it out somewhat, because here you have individuals, and according to David and also according to the research, we can see that modern Jewish yeshivas were only created in the 1800s. This is quite a recent phenomenon. And of course, all of these rabbis may speak with great conviction, but don't forget, many, if not most, if not almost all of them, also were only inculcated in a certain culture, in a certain belief system. So that's why they're talking this way. But now, if we again go back to the two groups, one wanting to uplift everyone and the other one wanting to go back to completely enslaving everybody else except the very most top elite, we can kind of glean which direction, especially with the Noahide laws, this idea would go towards. It would go towards the idea of, again, enslaving anybody who's not so-called belonging to the children of Israel. The issue only being that many of these rabbis and individuals proclaiming that ideology today may think of themselves as part of that group, but it does not mean that they are in the way that it is actually meant.
Right.
So yes, this can be seen as one example, and maybe this is then how it could make sense to have this dichotomy or this difference between Zionism and Sunniism, because Zionism here, as explained, would want to go back to the complete enslavement of everyone who isn't the elite, whereas Sunniism, again, just as a term, would want to have everyone, to wash themselves and pray and wear clothes. And apparently, David will get into this more soon, but this is also why there is always this huge fight about clothing. Even in Austria, I think recently, again, they started banning, or they consider banning, wearing headscarves for women under 14. I mean, this always has to be seen with caution, because oftentimes, of course, in the diasporas, also with Muslims, it's possible that they may become a lot more radical than they actually would be if they were at home. So there's many differentiating factors and issues here. But on a very basic level, why with the transhumanist, super liberal thing, it's always the idea, basically, I want to say, undress yourself, wear no clothes at all, ideally, because apparently this relates back to this old concept of when there were the beasts outside the city wall, they had no clothes. And certain individuals, again, want to see everyone who's not part of the uppermost top elite basically to have no clothes. And the closest thing you can get to that is, for women wearing hot pants and no bra, or I'm not sure how you would say that, right? And we're getting closer and closer to that in terms of, if you look, or closer, I won't speak to that in general, but we can certainly see with certain cultures, certain media, and certain music, that's, especially in the past few decades, very strongly pushed towards this idea and relabeled it then as feminism or something else. But the actual background play or fight that's occurring is whether or not you allow the regular individuals to wear clothes. And since, at least in the West, everyone can get cheap clothes, no one has to go naked. But then, well, if you can't do that, then you just brainwash them into practically being naked. And that in itself could still be discussed, whether that's irrelevant or not. But it also, of course, relates to the idea of promiscuity, right? And the idea of whether or not you have stable relationships, whether or not you have stable families, and whether or not, I mean, it's one fun thing, I think, is apparently in in Muslim religion, at least in the larger ones, you're allowed to have up to 4 wives, if I understand correctly. And recently I saw an interesting tidbit by a teacher or Muslim teacher in Austria. And he's kind of saying, well, look at this mess you have here. You know, you have your wife and then you cheat on her and so on. That's why in our religion we have 4 wives. You know? So this problem cannot happen. You know?
Well, that solves that problem right there. You know, no cheating on the wife. You know, that's your wife, right? So you know they're all wives, right?
Exactly. And if 4 then is at least, you know, enough. I'm not sure how exactly they came to the conclusion that it's 4 and not 2 or 5. But it's just interesting for me because I never really was into like Muslim culture. I don't know a lot about it, honestly. But it
Yeah.
gives you a different perspective on all of these regulations, where from a Western point of view, which always loves to take the moral high ground, would be like, oh, you have 4 wives, oh my God, and so on. But then look at the
Yeah.
real situation that's occurring. We're like, well, yeah, great, you have 1 wife, and who is not divorced yet, and who has not cheated yet. So that
Right.
also doesn't seem
Right.
to be the stable or intelligent system.
Yeah. Well, Oscar Wilde. I remember this quote by Oscar Wilde. He said, "Bigamy is having one wife too many, but monogamy is the same."
I'm not sure if I
So
catch that.
yeah, so bigamy is like when you have you know, 2 wives or like have you know, and then he's saying like, well, you know, that's wrong to have 2 wives. So he's basically kind of making a joke. And so bigamy is having 1 wife. That's the meaning of bigamy is having 1 wife too many. But monogamy, which is like having 1 relationship with somebody, that also is having, you know, 1 relationship too many. He's just making a joke, but at the same time, he was also a homosexual though too. So he didn't want to have any wives at all.
Yeah, right. Okay. Considering that, of course, it's a, I guess, double, triple joke. Mm-hmm.
Anyways, so like really kind of, you know, this is really linked back to what Yuri Bezmenov was saying about like, you know, demoralization of society. And to me, this whole left wing woke movement of like, you know, and this is like really again kind of like uh boiling down to do whatever you want, you know, is whatever, you know, I mean, like anything is a go, you know, and people, you want to go around and party and do pride or whatever, you know, go for it kind of deal. And there's repercussion to that way of thinking. There's repercussion to a society and to the individual, of course, of like behaving in that kind of way. So morality, you know, there's kind of a social standard. We're not really, we're not built. This reality is not built to do whatever you want, quote unquote. It's not meant to be that way. And but you can go and try it out, and then that's going to have a kind of a result, and that result is not panning out to be that great. You know what I mean? Because with demoralization of a society and people not having any principles and they're not behaving in the right, quote unquote, right way is showing that, whoa, I mean, that's when corruption sets in, you know, that's when people are starting to go astray from, you know, righteousness and honor and all those things that we actually highly esteem. So what's happening now is a lot of hypocrisy because we understand intuitively that we should be honorable. We should be, you know, speaking the truth and all this kind of stuff. So a lot of people, what they do, especially online, is they present themselves to be honorable and they present themselves in a particular way, but behind the scenes, they're doing something scandalous. They're a part of some kind of you know, their scoundrelous behavior. So this is, you know, a pinnacle of hypocrisy. And in religion as well, you know, you have these priests who present themselves to be like the interpreter of God, and they're going to be the conduit of God, and they speak, you know, God's words, but behind the scenes, you know, they're involved in all kinds of stuff like PDF and whatnot. You know what I mean? So that's been already evidenced. That's already been shown to be the case with many different religious factions. So it's about hypocrisy.
Yes, there is certainly a lot of hypocrisy. And yeah, I guess the best thing is, you know, don't put yourself I'm just talking about myself now, on the pedestal or whatever else, because it seems that this often only exacerbates the problems then. And the other thing it made me think of, and I'm not even saying it's good or bad unto itself, but even in official mainland history, don't they say that technically, if these stories even are correct, most of the US government was basically blackmailed by the first FBI director or whatever, because at least at that point, there was a strong prohibition against homosexuality, and he got everyone on file basically, or, things like that. And then it only gets worse from there, if you know what I'm saying. So, yeah.
But there's still blackmails going on. I mean, that's the whole, like Pizzagate type of stuff in my mind, with Epstein and all these individuals. I mean, that's how I imagine the governments and the individual politicians are actually controlled through MK Ultra. And there's like a whole system, it seems, that is actually there to create sex slaves and stuff like that, and they're passed off to these politicians to be used, right? But then at the same time, you hook them by this like desire and lust, but on the other hand, you also like have that threat of exposing them as PDFs and corrupt individuals. So they have both sides, which they can control an individual to go this way or go that way, and they want you to be controlled that way.
But also how it seems to relate back to, at least for the mid-level tier, is that usually, I mean, we can only speculate about this, but it appears that, again, only certain individuals are really drawn to this, maybe because they are encultured to have a, let's say, lack of morality. And I think in a very simple way, it starts with greed, I want to say, greedy for money or other things. And then you're like, oh, well, I'm going to partake in this ritual and that ritual. I'm going to do this and that oath and so on. And then it's, like you said, chaos is a ladder, or
Yeah.
immorality maybe is a ladder as well. And those
Sure.
that are very willing, of course, they more easily succeed in that game. But fundamentally, why is it again? I want to say, if they were, who is, but still, if they would truly hold to the basic tenets, let's say, of the Christian faith or the Muslim faith or whatever, they most likely wouldn't get involved in anything like this at all. At the first moment when they noticed, oh, I'm taking an unfair advantage over someone, even just economically or something like this, by confusing them or lying to them, they would be like, that's wrong, I'm stopping. So most likely they would never even get into these circles where then more and more of these things, crazier and crazier, would be offered to them. Because it's obvious, they're not even going to play, but this also most likely means they're not going to be part of the economic scamming structure and have the biggest house on the block. So also here, it relates. It reminds me of a story about Native Americans, but by now I don't even know, if any of that can be taken at face value. But also here they say, what is important? Everyone needs to have a tent, everyone needs to have food and all of that. And it's like a moral structure, right? And if that gets corrupted, then you can infiltrate a society or can infiltrate families, individuals, you enlist them. And why is it possible? Because they have no moral qualms about having heavy disadvantage up to the point of poisoning and so on for their fellow men, if it means that they can have an advantage themselves. Again, relating back to the recent lockdown stories and all of that. So it comes back again to the spiritual or moral aspect, to what extent such a structure may actually succeed. So again, it is up to the people, no matter what someone is scheming, because if everybody would say, well, if I can choose, that 100 people are doing decent and I'm also doing decent, or I can choose 100 people, how should I say, will lose all their money and I'm getting rich. Well, which one are you going to choose? That's the basic thing where it starts, I think.
Yeah, and again, this is a philosophical question, and it's a kind of a dog eat dog world, and some people just kind of rationalize it to the point. Well, if I don't do it, then somebody else would, so it might as well be me. If I wasn't taking advantage of other people, and I don't get ahead, and I don't get rich, and I came up with this solution or this scheme, let's just call it, and I'm not that clever enough that somebody else wouldn't do the same thing. So I'm in the position right now to be able to do this and get away with it. You know what I mean? But the thing is, if you truly believe in God, you're not going to get away with anything, maybe for a little while, but also the fact that you have been a participant of ruining lives and a lot of people's lives. And there's a reason and a rationale as to why a lot of these, sociopaths, psychopaths, like move up the ladder quite quickly is because they are willing and they have no qualms about throwing people under the bus, and they're willing to throw people under the bus to get ahead, so they're willing to step on you to get above everybody else. So that's one line of thinking, and their rationale is quite clear, which is that it's a dog eat dog world. We need to survive, and then I'm just slightly better than you in terms of being able to betray people, or whatever, right? And so I just happen to stab you in the back before you stab me in the back.
And the only thing here I'm wondering about here, which maybe is just short-sightedness, especially if there is some type of transcendental aspect to this life that it actually goes on in whatever way, shape, or form. But even if it doesn't, I'm like, how can you ever feel safe if you play life in that way? Or isn't it much too stressful if you only think of who can stab whom first? Because then most likely you'll be surrounded by individuals who think the same way. And then it's only the question when it's going to be your turn to be stabbed in the back. And I don't see that as a very comfortable position, but maybe for some, they're willing to take that deal. I'm always saying, I don't know how these people can sleep. But
Well, I'm sure they sleep pretty well, at the same time, because like just because we are not like them, but the thing that differs, I think, with some of us is that we have wised up to the tactics and the strategies that they have implemented. Maybe we don't know all the tactics and strategy, but basically, I think that's part of the game, in my opinion, to come to a realization. Hey, this is how they are manipulating you. Like the thing that with the history that we're getting into is like, oh, backdating is a kind of one of those things that they do as an example. This is the way they manipulated history, or they've been duplicating or triplicating historical events, and they've changed names and locations and timelines, and this is another way in which that they have manipulated. In finance, they have a particular, like, strategy to move money around and fund this and fund that, or the governments may use like kind of a third party, like Blackwater, right, or XE, so their military is not going into and invading some other countries, but it's a private military, mercenaries that they're using. So these are all just tactics, you know, just for optics, because optics play a role. That's why they do have PR campaigns, and that's why they have people who are, like, hey, we have good relations and we do care, like ExxonMobil will tell about, oh, we care about the seals, we care about the fish in the ocean, and this is just a little mistake that we made, or whatever. But hey, we really are environmentally friendly people, like they need all these kind of things because they have to care about what people think. So that also means that we do have some power, but we have to wise up to the tactics that they are implementing in order to be able to overcome that, and that's the game, that's the struggle that we continuously be continuously like well, we continuously have to fight through and really learn what this thing is all about, in my mind.
yes, agreed. What I would
Yep.
suggest is
Yep.
we can watch the second video, which is part
Sure.
of that video from America is Ruled by Muslims, which is
Okay.
from minute 13 and 13 seconds. This is
Okay.
about, let's see, this is about 10 minutes. So if you like, you can play it on 125 or something like this.
Okay.
I just think it's cool because there we see one of the very few, British Pate 1910 original videos. This is the Shriner Convention in Miami, Florida, May 1928, with David's
Okay.
commentary.
All right, so let's play this and make sure that it's playing. I hope everybody can hear it well. I do need to take a slight break, but the video is going to go on. So let's play the video, and then it'll be like 10 minutes, you said?
Yes, if we play at 1.1 speed, it is a 1.0 speed. It is pretty much exactly 10 minutes. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, yeah, 1.25 speed I will play. Okay.
Perfect. Just 1 second. We
Yes.
cannot hear it yet.
So here we
now.
have, they're making
Perfect.
fake objects of ancient Egypt. They're making them in America 100 years ago in the same way that they were making them in the United States. Here they're making them in America. And it shows you how they crafted these things. Nothing amazing about it in many buildings, you know, in the church buildings. Whoa, how did they do it? These tall statues here, they're doing it in the United States, and they made many of these things. They put them in many places. The Freemasons make them in the same way that they were involved in making these things in Egypt and in ancient Greece, ancient India, and many other places. So here we could see them at work. Yes, but here they're making ones in America for their celebrations. But notice, pay attention to the writing, the pharaohs, because they have the royal blood. And flamenco, before Stephen came, yeah. So and even after Christ came, these pharaohs, because ancient Egypt wasn't told. So now the Garden of Allah, the Garden of Allah, the Garden of Allah. Yes. So the thing is, this is what is in Freemasonry, and the Shriners are at the top. And in every city in America, here they are preparing for their, you know, annual celebrations. But 100 years ago, the celebrations were so big because America was basically run by these people, the real Freemasons, not like today. Like today, you'll see Shriners, you'll see, you know, Shriners from the African community and other things, because they invented new groups and brought in new people so that nobody will ever know. Look at the cranes and everything. If people are imagining how did they constructing horse and buggies, it's not horse and buggies. Look at this. This is 100 years ago. Can you see it? 100 years ago, they even had machinery of how they built these buildings. Can you see it, Raphael?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if you could hear. Yes. So here we have, you know, like the Muslim priest. Yes, the Masonic priest with the beard, you know, and you know, the Muslims call it Adan or Azan. And look at this. This is outside Olympia. Look at their processions. They're like military processions. This is in Miami. They had them in New York, in other cities. They basically ran America. They created America. And many people will say, even though they falsified the history, many presidents, many leaders, many big generals, they're all Freemasons, and the masters were Shriners and above them. So here they are. They're showing they're making the Garden of Allah. That the United States, because you know the Europeans are moving there. So what is the religion of the Europeans? They've come from all over Europe, and they want to build the Garden of Allah. So they made the United States beautiful. The United States is the Garden of Allah. You see, look at them. Notice all the fez hats that the Ottoman Germans were wearing. Now, all these hats, they disappeared in America after around the time that the television became very uncommon, because they needed to hide Palestine on his hat. Look, it says Palestine. I forgot him. He's a famous guy. This guy here. Yes, forgot his name, but notice these things. They're showing that in the building the Garden of Allah. Yes, and the royalty and the royal family is important. Look, the U.S. Army and the main army. Yes, it was basically an Islamic army or something to do with Islam. Yes, and they had the same thing, the drums and the trumpets and everything, same like the Ottoman Germans. And then, now all over the world, many people have hidden this. Today, mainly the Turks carry on this thing when they show the history of the Ottomans. And there's a few Shriner processions, but they don't. It's become something more like a joke and a celebration. Smaller ones these days, but you don't get to see how they're really involved in the politics. Look, everybody's come out in the city. You see, this is what Miami was. It wasn't the skyline. And you can see everybody's come out, all the European people, for the Garden of Allah, because everybody knew it was Allah or Alleluia. Yes, so Miami was a smaller city. There's many videos, many things. People can check this themselves. Being Freemasons, a Christian, or they're Jewish or something. No, something more connected to Islam. Yes, it's more connected to Islam, and you will see the star and the moon symbol on their hats. It's written Allah and all these Arabic words that you'll find in the Quran. And of course, they're going to say, we don't know where it came from, and then many things. But of course, Masonry is a secret. So of course, it's going to stay secret. But we don't see these things anymore, do we, Raphael? Are you shocked by what you're seeing?
Well, because of the comments
Raphael.
and the information from you, I'm not exactly shocked, but it's impressive to see, certainly, yes. And very much different from what you would see today in America.
We're talking about America. Yes. Yeah, because you've got to hide it, because the media has come out. So now you put the actors, the public actors, you know, Democrats voting, everything. And then the thing is, they've all got Islamic hats on, everything with Islamic names written down, Allah, Malaika, Palestine, Saladin, Mecca, Medina, and all these things. The truth is, there is something else. And of course, they have their own interpretations of the Quran. Yes, their interpretations, same like the Quranists have theirs, but the Quranists is every man for himself. You know, like the Quranists are like the Lone Rangers going out there with their guns. Yeah, you know. Oh, please, no stupid comments. There was many stupid comments. You know, please grow up a little. But here we could see, you know, it's just huge. The celebrations are huge. I mean, the thing is, you've got to turn and think, what's going on? This is the Ottoman army, the Ottoman band. What is this? Yes, and why have these things disappeared? You see, Sultan Murad, the Murad temple. Sultan Murad, he's famous. I mean, he's known in the Islamic world. I mean, none of you people have heard of these things. These people, they control the United States. They control Canada. They control basically the most powerful country in the world. But now they're in hiding and they've gone in secret. Or maybe it was more open back in the days. Yeah, nobody investigated it. It's because Islam was part of life then, original Islam was. And there was many different factions within original Islam. So this is the original thing. These days, they're going to show you something else. And they had the red coats, same like the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish red flag and things like this. Yes? What are they showing here? I don't know what they're showing here, but you can see these are the builders of the United States. And many of the buildings that people are saying are very old are not. He's wearing the hat of Sultan Murad. Yes, the potentate. This means the Garden of Allah. It's written here again. Potentate means that we are a faction of the caliphate, yeah, and everything. And notice all these things, all these things, these Islamic style things and everything, what we would call Islam today, but they've made you think it's from the Middle East. It came from Europe. These are European traditions, and the people were celebrating in America like that European traditions and things like this. But they've hidden all these things today. It's because it's become televised and other things, and there are other actors at play. It's because within the royal families they're fighting who is going to be the global Mashiach or the global leader. Yes, but these are the people in power. They run the United States. So many people say America is supporting Israel. No, it's the Muslims who are supporting Israel. It's because they are the people that are at the top. They are the people at the top, and they're fighting amongst themselves. Yes, and they've created an artificial aurora borealis, and look at the machinery 100 years ago. So they did have all kinds of machinery and all these things, but people don't realize. 98 years ago. This is in 1928. Yeah. So can you see it? So the thing is, many people are saying, how do they build these buildings? People don't look. It's because people don't want to examine what the Quran says. The Quran gives you another version of history. Yes. And of course, I've told people, these net Qurans are 90% accurate. But if you're looking for deep information with the 10% accuracy, I suggested people to go to the mosques, because the mosques, they're same like the Masonic temples. Yes. If you went to a Masonic temple and you studied the Quran, which they studied the Bible, the Quran, and the secrets there in these, Muslim temples, because that's what the temples are. The Freemasonic temples, temples. Many people don't realize America is run by the and but there are certain branches. So now, if you went to the Masonic temples, you'll understand the Quran a bit more. Yes, but of course, not everybody has access. So another place you can go to is go to the mosque where they don't use dictionaries. And they have oral, because the oral Qurans don't match these manuscripts. Yes, and what you see online, the oral Quran is the actual Quran. Yes, in the manuscripts they've modified many other things. So that's why I tell people to go there and don't listen to people online or on the streets or any cowboys making videos out there. I mean, there's many cowboys out there. Yes. So now let's have a look at to see who the Shriners actually are. Yes.
I think this is good.
Yeah. All right. So what to make of this information for those who are listening, and the questions they may be asking is like, what does this prove? Does this prove anything at all? Who are these Masons, or not Masons, but the Muslims who controlled America? Who are they?
Yeah, so what this relates back to is, as it is mentioned in the video as well, that they even claim themselves they originally came from Mecca. This is kind of like the backstory with the, you would say, European Muslims, whereas it appears, from what I understand through David, that they were basically the ones building America, and only later you had all these immigration waves of more Europeans in the 20th century coming over, and then only, populating it. I wouldn't claim to have figured out, what exactly happened when, or who, where, what, why. But it's certainly interesting for me to see you have these huge parades. I wonder, today we have different types of huge parades, so you can see there's maybe a different spirit. I mean, we have both, because you brought it up, we have both pride parades. Also, we have big Trump rallies, so But basically, again, just coming back to this idea, and there's also images shown, I'm not sure if it's in the preview also, where you see that they are big time, even surrounding the president and stuff like that. And today you would never see this. And the way David explains it simply is that this was one of the more recent instances, let's say, when those that actually held the power moved towards the back, let's say. So the way he explains it is saying that when TV and everything came out, they knew we're only going to use actors and so on. There's a recent example also with John F. Kennedy. Maybe we'll have time to talk about it or not today. But basically just, putting actors in front, and they actually in the back end still playing their game, as we outlined earlier, in terms of these two opposing factions, but they do not enter the public light themselves anymore at all, which makes sense to me, because if you consider you would have any real power, would you be showing your face anywhere and tell everyone, oh, look, I'm so important? Yeah. You're just waiting, to get hit by whoever, right? So
Yeah. I mean, I would think that it would be naive to think that there's none of that goes on. Oh no, the presidents and everybody who show their face and the names of are like actually as is. Everything is exactly as is. No, I mean, I think that would be very naive to think that way. But then again, because of the secrecy and the obscurity of the people behind the scenes, we don't know the extent of their power. We don't know who they are, and that's the whole purpose of why they're in those type of positions. But I think, and then the question might be like, well, how do you know then if you don't really know who they are? Well, I think like it's just to me logical that they would be like that. We have people in the back already. Are we ready to bring people up or?
Almost. So
Okay.
what I'd like to do, maybe just to finish this, is and to have the last bit of the information from David, we can play the 5 minutes for the European Barbarians Naked Truth, which is his introduction to that presentation.
Yes. Okay, 1 second. Okay, let's play 5 minutes of this. The first 5 minutes, yes?
Yes.
In this episode, we will look at the star-fought cities, which were only for the royal elites and their families throughout Europe, known as the kings and the dukes and the nobles, and their peasant slave workers. The rest of the world actually lived outside these small walled cities and outside the star-forts in the wild. And we will look at the history of cotton and the history of wool and see who really had clothes in Europe and throughout the world, and who was naked just a few centuries ago. We will look at the evidence, and we're not going to have any imagination. Where do you think cotton or wool comes from? And who controlled the sheep at the time just 300-400 years ago? Now, once we understand this, it will change world history. Yes, the walled cities actually show that the people of Europe were not Christians or Muslims or anything else, and that the majority, they were naked, living outside the city walls, and they didn't have homes, and they didn't have any animals as livestock, and they were without cotton, and they were without wool, and therefore they were naked. So anyone fighting about race or nationality or religion, thinking it was their family history, they are just wasting time, and they're just following the hatred that is found within the ruling elites. And this is their history, and that is why they fight each other. And today we've learned their history, a lot of it, and we're fighting about this history amongst ourselves. Not only this, the people who were outside these city walls, yes, they had no proper languages. Yes, and all the history and the religions and the languages were given to them only recently, when the walled cities were destroyed after the fall of Constantinople, which was known as Rome. Yes. So we're going to have a look at this properly in this episode. And some of the peasants, yes, or beasts that they call them, which are mentioned in the Bible. And the Bible is their history. It is the actual history of the Middle Ages. Yes, lived within the city walls, and they learnt a few words because they needed to learn some words, and because they were working, they were slaves for the elite, and they had a few clothing, but they weren't actually allowed to wear the exact clothing as the elites. Well, anyway, these people, these peasants, pests or beasts, were not seen as human. And this is why they invented the story of evolution, about life coming in raindrops from outside the earth in other parts of the universe. And then they said they arrived and landed onto the planet Earth, and then they evolved and became monkeys, and then further evolved and became humans. Because they believe, the elites, they believe they are the gods, or they are the pure bloodline, or many of them believe that they were chosen by God. The religions and the history of the wars and the religious divisions, these crusades and these wars, it's their history. And the rest of the world entered into these religions only in the last 200-300 years as a fall of the result of the fall of Rome or Constantinople. And Constantinople fell because of Sultan Fatih Mehmet or Sultan Muhammad. Yes, and there is too much historical evidence from the last few centuries which clearly show that the people in Europe were actually naked and illiterate, without proper languages and without any clothing. And the elite wrote down in their history and called these people peasants, pests, beasts, or barbarians. We will examine these things in this episode. We will start by showing modern India and Pakistan, and then move on to Europe and other parts of the world. And we'll examine the evidence of how people survived naked in cold temperatures in cold places, such as northern China and northern Europe. There is actually too much evidence, so we don't need to invent history or imagine things. We will go through a lot of this evidence in this episode, and it's going to take about 3 hours. Yes, this history is actually very important, because if the people of the world realized that most of them, more than 80% of them, they were outside these small star forts or outside these walled castle type of cities, which were very small, then the people will know that the Crusades and the history that we are told is not the history of the people. And these historical hatreds and this nationalism and this religiosism, yes, has nothing to do with the people of the world. This actually changes world history for the majority of the people of the world, because the majority of the people of the world and their ancestors lived outside these walls. They didn't have these animals or livestock. This is why they were a lot shorter, and the elites were much taller and were known as giants. Yes, the people lived outside, basically naked. They had no land, they had no industry, they had no schools, they had no homes, they didn't have anything, no technology, no languages, and they lived basically naked. This is the sad reality for the majority of the people. But the evidence is available if anybody wants to check it, and we are going to examine this evidence in this episode. Let's roll.
Okay. So, yeah, do you have any comments, Raphael?
I think I outlined the basis of this at the beginning. Is there anything, yeah, you'd like to say? But I just think it's fascinating, because the idea that basically also the Renaissance and all the technology and everything was kept by very few individuals within the Stafford City walls, I think that is crucial information to consider, because that, of course, completely changes how we project back if we imagine what occurred, 150, 200, 300 years ago. And, switching that consideration on or off, I think makes a incredible difference when we consider history.
Yeah. Only thing I kind of want to say is that, like, the what David Ewing Jr. consistently show us is that a lot of these cities, like Mecca or other places, they had nobody living there, like 100 some years ago. You know what I mean? Like, it was completely empty. Yeah, they're a metropolis now, but we're talking about like old cities, like Istanbul was the capital of the old world order, and Moscow and these like European cities, but um other places. So there was like a huge population boom that started to occur like what, maybe 500, 600 years ago. And then, like and then not
Less,
500,
even less.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
200
way
years
less,
ago. 200 years,
200 years
200 years.
ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So like basically, population was quite stable for a long period of time, and then boom, 200 years ago, it started to like go up, right? And I don't know, like trying to put all the pieces together for the consumption of the general public. I think that's very difficult, but I think there must be a way to kind of outline like the big picture. This happened. This is the reason why it happened. And thus, this is the result of it. And so far as I understand about Jesus and Muhammad, is that they were revolutionaries and they were individuals who, want to create kind of a egalitarian society, where bring the power back to the population and the people, and that's why these individuals are revered, and placed up on. But at the same time, the other side is also knowing the popularity of these people can also use their image for their own purposes as well, which is also kind of conflating, you know, right?
that's exactly what's going on. But what it also always reminds me of, also David showed this to me, is that very particularly in Albert Pike's writing, he deliberately and explicitly denigrates the prophet politician Muhammad. So he says, yes, we have all these great things and so on, but certainly Muhammad, yeah, he's a nobody, or you cannot consider him to be relevant at all. I quickly see if I can find the quote again. Maybe I'll quickly read it. And then there is one more comment I'd like to read, and then we can open up the panel. Is there anything else that you find interesting or curious or to consider just while I'm looking up this comment?
Well, just to touch on Albert Pike, and I kind of imagine him to be another one of those actors that's been kind of presented to people, kind of like Madame Blavatsky and other individuals, and like Morals and Dogma, and he's considered like a very learned man, and he spoke, like they said, like 8 languages, like fluently on all this kind of stuff. So he's kind of a father figure for masonry in America, Albert Pike. But all that considering, I'm not entirely sure if that individual actually existed, but there is somebody behind that image. There's somebody behind all those writings, So whomever that person is, I'm sure had things to say about, Muhammad that they wanted to express, you know.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, of course, also Ivan, I would consider they may well be actors, but yeah, the power structure behind them, of course, is putting out their messaging and their ideas. So I found the quotes on Freemasonry from Morals and Dogma, but this is not the one I was looking. Oh yeah, right, here we have it. Okay, and I'm gonna, let's see. Okay, first I'm gonna read what I have up, and then I'm gonna share the other thing very briefly. So this is now just briefly an aside, because understandably, anyone who is critical of this information, very happy that you're watching, especially if you're still on. But as Nachiketa said, believe it or not, but this is not necessarily something that can easily be understood or compressed within 10 minutes. Because let's not forget, we're talking about 100 years of history. We're talking about a very different outlook on history. So please don't expect to watch one video and get a grip on it. I don't know how much time I've spent on it, and I'm not claiming that I have a grip on it. But if you're honestly interested in watching, then, well, keep investigating and try putting the pieces together. Other than that, if you want to jump to your own conclusions or get triggered, you're free to do so. But then, yeah, what to say?
Yep.
So here, yes, you may briefly share the comment I put up.
Okay.
I'm just gonna do an abbreviated version of this.
Where's the comment?
Right. So this is the video. Sorry, the screen that I'm sharing.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So I may have brought this up before on your channel, just briefly for some, random online corroboration of what David says. So this is someone from his hometown is in Whittier, and he says he researched it. The story is very sketchy, and he says, so there is a pentagram on this castle. However, he says, it's obvious to me this castle was built well over 550 years ago by Muslims. That's the way he puts it anyways, yeah? Not the modern Christians. The Knights Templar did a weird cornerstone ceremony to claim the castle, wearing robes and doing a strange ritual here in Whittier, California in 1891. Then the castle was demolished 30 years later. It was a beautiful castle with 2 giant antennas and a clock tower, also with a clock that had no hands. Like the clock stopped working centuries before and they didn't know how to fix it. That's just speculation, of course. Years before Tartaria became well known, I asked an old man named Al, who had one eye and a big knife and seemed to know everything, though he's now passed away. I asked him one day in 2016, who was in Whittier before it was Whittier? And he said, the Moors were here. They built 2 castles, one over here and one on the hill. Both were demolished. I asked him, who were the Moors? He said, the Muslims. The Muslims were here. It blew my mind and I couldn't make sense of it until Tartaria became a meme. Then it all made sense. Whittier subsequently became one of the cities where Richard Nixon grew up, and Whittier is where Nixon did Operation Paperclip from his law office. My hometown has a very sketchy past. Whittier is also where HARP technology was invented. You know, electrical, yeah, as we know. There's a video about that. YouTube, The Electrodome, A Forgotten Tale About Turnbull Canyon. And then one more comment from him is, so more context. Again, according to this commenter, the Indian Wars continued in California officially up to the late 1870s. The Indian Wars was where the US government was paying the US military to kill the quote-unquote Indians. Men, women, and children were slaughtered by the US military, and soldiers were paid $50 per head. It says this is official history. Unofficially, the commenter is saying these Indians were in fact Muslims, and it's entirely possible, according to commenters' research, that the Indian Wars may have continued well into the 1880s and possibly 1890s under the guise of oil mining. Because you see, with oil mining, the US government had the excuse to go up into the hills and destroy the land, hunting for perfect places to set up oil mining camps, killing their way into possible Muslim encampments of survivors of the Indian Wars, and wipe them out completely and extract natural resources to further fuel the Indian Wars, which was a complete and utter genocide officially admitted by the US government. If that's what they're willing to admit, imagine what they're hiding. They're not admitting that the oil mining operations were secret military operations, but what I'm saying is entirely possible given what we know. The city of Whittier was an oil town, and before that it was obviously a Muslim town. The Muslims could have easily escaped into the hills, and that could explain the vast extent of oil mining in Whittier. They were chasing after the Muslims and making excuses to destroy the land and thoroughly pollute all the streams with oil to make the land uninhabitable to everyone who isn't paying for tap water, which they did in Whittier in 1893, acting like they're heroes for connecting Whittier to Los Angeles water grid after destroying all of Whittier's natural streams. So it's not exactly sure, and the terms is difficult, you know, what is Muslim and what is Muslim, but the idea of, for example, herding individuals into cities and so on could well make sense, yeah. But anyways, so this is one comment by someone who, through their own research, discovered there's something wrong with mainstream history, and in the West, let's say overall, may have a lot more to do with so-called Muslims, at least in the old term, than almost anybody would be willing to admit. And I always love to bring this up, especially in Austria, the right-wing pundit politicians, but I guess in the US it's similar. They always love to harp on the idea Europe has a Judeo-Christian heritage for thousands of years. And sure, original Judaism, original Christianity, original Islam, sure. But they always love to completely exclude any idea of Islam from Europe, even though it appears that only 100 years ago or something, it was very much different, but this history, or this aspect of history, has been completely and utterly scrubbed.
Yeah. Well, that's how history works. They just scrub things and erase things, and lie of omission is probably more effective than anything else, really.
Yes, and now I found the quote which I wanted to show. This is just very brief.
Mhm.
We have it, I believe, here. Yes. So this is
Can you make
from
it bigger?
Morals and... Yes, I believe so. This is from Morals and Dogma
Mhm.
by Albert Pike.
Mhm.
And he says, it is absurd to suppose that men of intellect recognized Muhammad as an inspired prophet. And this again would go back to this idea that modern Freemasonry simply is the attempt to reconstruct whatever the Muslim system is, and yeah, trying to be an opposing force. And I don't know if there is, let's say, a general stream within this, but I would wonder how many, let's say, mid-level Freemasons are more inclined towards modern day Zionism than against it. I don't know. I
Mm.
don't know a survey, but this is just something interesting to consider.
Yeah, I mean, not that I have a good grasp of Freemasonry and such, but the way I do see, um, that fraternity is a there's a control mechanism. I think there's a kind of an aspect of like brotherly fraternity, and like people kind of see that as like a place of support, to join Freemasonry. And then, it's like, oh, we're going to do good things, and we're going to be doing charitable work and all this. So there's a front aspect to Freemasonry that attracts people. And, but, people who understand it, like you don't really get above certain degrees. You have to be related to people to get above to the higher degrees of things. And there's a heavy integration of Jewish bloodline. I'm going to put that in quotes, like Jewish bloodlines and Freemasonry, and that's like very much involved. And people who are flat earthers and such, they understand that a lot of the NASA people, a lot of the uh, astronauts are also Freemasons. So I think there is a kind of an inner core who actually understand, what that organization is about, and they have their schemes, but then most everybody else is kind of like cannon fodder, right? So that's kind of how I see Freemasonry. But then that quote by Albert Pike, who is highly revered, of course, as a Freemason among the Freemasons and such, is basically showing that there is a diametric opposition to Islam that Freemasonry holds. It holds them in contempt because, like being part of an Islamic faith, Muhammad is like, at the very top, and they never say anything disgraceful towards Jesus either. They also looked at Jesus as a prophet, not as a god, but as a prophet. But they put Muslim or Muhammad at a very top. And again, I think it's good to remind people that from what I understood about the word Muhammad, it means like a great truth. Muhammad, it's like where the word math comes from, like mathematics is like truthfulness or something like that. It's true, Maha is like great, like that's also true in Hindi or in Sanskrit, like Mahatma Gandhi means the great Gandhi or whatever. So like Muhammad is the great truth. So was it his real name, or is that a title that's given to him?
Yes, very correct. Also, from what I understand, and again, here we have to always be careful, with the labeling, who is calling whom what. But also, this
Yep.
could explain always the strange thing, even with the Templars, when they say, "Oh, you worship the devil." Well, who is the devil? Could the devil only have been a new name, for example, for Muhammad, who was labeled as such? Because, of course, as the Stafford City dwellers, who are the elitists and want to keep it that way, of course they would label a egalitarian revolutionary as a devil. To them, it is the devil, perfectly
Yep.
correct from their point of view. And this is always so important, even if we look at, the Bible or the Quran, which the way I understand now are simply medieval history books, even though many people don't like to hear that. That's just my opinion anyways. Who cares about my opinion, right? But that also here we always have to consider who is talking for whom, about whom, from what perspective. Even with the US Constitution, they love to bring this up, this idea, we the people, who have all these rights. Well, who exactly is we the people? Do you only imagine yourself in that position, or is this how it was actually meant? And the same goes for these medieval history books. So here, just as a fan service to anyone on your channel interested in the whole NASA thing and Earth research, because David always loves to go on the 19. So I thought I'd just bring this up. David has updated many of his books. So this one is The Ancient Greece Did Not Exist. You can find it online. And yeah, ancient Greece is famous for astronomy and philosophy. Historians and scientists say that the ancient Greeks said the Earth was round like a ball. Oh, here we go. Yeah. And then NASA space program Apollo was named after the ancient Greeks. On the 19th of July, 1969, Neil Armstrong arrived on the moon. The moonwalk then officially was on the 20th, but always you have this crossover, 1920. And let's see. Yeah, in the New World, people are told that the Earth is round like a ball. What should we believe? Well, people have seen these photos. And the question is, of course, are they telling lies? And why is there this interesting conflation between the space programs, which are there to solidify the idea that space is real the way they portray it? And why is it associated with the ancient Greek gods, especially if there's anything to the idea that David points out here, that ancient Greece actually did not exist in the way they portray it at all. So I think that's an interesting crossover here between the topics. But yeah, I think that's all I'm going to show from this book. But just to point it out that David is also, at least sometimes in certain ways, referring back to this idea. And yeah, then you have, of course, more 19th anniversary day, ascending to Mars, aircraft designers. His first experiment in towed flight on the 19th of September. And the 19 basically, on the one hand, is in the, I believe it's Surah 30, Al-Muhadir, the warning with over it are 19. And for whatever reason, it appears as if the elite or whoever else cannot help themselves or have an agreement or whatever it is to signal to each other anything where there's something manufactured, constructed, or fudged. They love to put the 19 on it, and let's not talk about what was it? 9/11 is 11th of September, but 119, 9/11. This all relates.
And the Jesuit rings. I mean, like this code 19 to me is just absolutely mind-blowing information, and then what David Ewing Jr. consistently has done within his book is to show all the code 19s throughout history, going from Napoleon and all the hoaxes and, you name it. And then in here also the NASA stuff and Apollo, the moon landings, and it's important for, I think, people to have a kind of an idea of why that is. Again, the Quran speaks about the 19, right? And that's how, like, if I remember correctly, David Ewing Jr. came to some realization about that in the Quran. They talk about the 19 angels, who are the keepers, right, of the flame and such, right? And who are they? What are they? So there's a kind of a spiritual element that is being at play here as well. This kind of the demons of sort, and the coding of the 19. And a lot of a lot of the stuff that we talk about, there's a lot of 19 encoding, so much of it though too, so it's fascinating.
Yes, the 19 really goes on and on and on. And in so many of his books, he does a great job of outlining this. There's even a book about Donald Trump, where he's spewing the 19s left and right, I want to say. So it really doesn't matter if it's the left wing or the right wing. These codes, they are everywhere in so many major crises, major world events. It is truly incredible. And I have to say, I'm a little bit, I'm not sure, surprised or whatever else, that really I have not heard anyone mention this 19 coding as explicitly as David has. Although there
Right.
is the Quran code in the 19 Quran code, which was popularized, I believe, by the Sufis. But even here, David points out this code actually may have been reinserted into the written copy and would not
Yes.
exist in the same way in the oral copy. And something similar actually maybe with the Bible as well. So everything here is coded through. And yeah, I would wish more people would kind of get hip to that, because it's such a simple coding. And even current world events. Recently, someone posted this because we made a small channel where we're collecting these ideas. Let's see. So, for example, even the last 40 seconds of the Bulls versus Lakers game ended in 119 points. I have
Yeah.
no idea about basketball stuff, whatever. And then also
Right.
one other thing, there is a patch from the jacket which Elon Musk wore in his, I guess, recent Hannity interview. And it is the original Starship 19 patch, including the iconic Star Wars phrase, "where no man has gone before." The revised patch has been modernized with the new motto in Latin, which translate to "live long and prosper." Can't make this up.
With this sign, which is a Freemasonic Jewish, sign, those two. So yeah, you can make that whatever you want. You know, take it or leave it. So great. I mean, there's a lot of information there, and again, I encourage people to go and watch Raphael's work with David Ewing Jr. over at his channel at Act Like 26, and I mean, you're gonna have to spend really hours. Like I was binge watching last year and then even the year before I reached out to Raphael because I had an interview with him last year once I started to make my channel. But prior to that, I was just like, trying to consume as much of this information as possible. So now we have like met and have communicated with each other, and we have collaborated, and work continues, guys. There's a lot of stuff to go through, and continuously, things are uncovered uh, to have more clarity about what has happened in the past. So this is important in my mind. You know.
Yes, well, in mine as well, because believe it or not, my motivation is not fame or fortune, but I actually am interested in figuring out what's going on, because my
Yeah.
main point always is, and this relates to also this idea, of the recent population explosion, I want to say, which may well have occurred only because some egalitarian profit politicians actually
Right.
helped the people at large so they could properly build up anything at all. And for
Oh yeah.
me, for some reason, maybe too many video games or I don't know what, but I always like to look at the world in this overarching view, like where are we at?
Yeah.
What are the actually relevant parts, and how can humanity, both within and beyond my incarnated lifetime, actually progress? And what are the things we actually have to look out for to make this a, dare I say it, sustainable development, and not get into more unnecessary scams or wars or just needless suffering. Yeah, that's just
Mm.
my view.
Yeah, well, the words, that phrase, sustainable development has kind of like, a World Economic Forum written all over it, though, too, and they have a way of obfuscating all these great slogans, really. I mean, that's what we want. We want sustainable development, but not in their image, not in their way of understanding it. And
Again,
we
the
have
question,
to,
sustainable for whom, is always the question
right,
again.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, for whom? But like, like I give homage to Muhammad. I give homage to Jesus for like these people have existed and they understood like, the corruption that was being at play and and they went against the grain. And that's why, such individuals were murdered and sacrificed and there had to be a war. And without these individuals, we wouldn't really be where we are. And maybe we're not in a like the best of the places, but things could always be worse. I mean, you could be literally naked without a language, like living out in the woods and trying to survive and turning into like beasts, which our ancestors had to like go through in order for you to have arrived here. So we owe a lot to the people who have survived, in the past. And then, we are wearing clothes and we're like more or less, hip to like what's going on, but like the fight continues, and this is part of that fight in my mind, to like share that information and consuming this information and understanding what the truth is. That's part of the battle as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly, because we're imagining often, and also I guess I did, this, beastman, caveman idea. Some like to conflate it with human evolution, which many people have become hip to, is also not as they say, right? But we
Right.
imagine this maybe 2,000 years ago we were living in the cave or had nothing or whatever. But what if
Right.
in most regions, or in the most surface area, there was maybe one small Stafford city with culture and language and technology? Wherever they originally have it from is still an open question, but almost everyone else 200-300 years ago still was on that level. That's a completely different view, at least for me, because otherwise I would also, this was my stance, much more stronger, I'd readily complain and be like, what a joke of a system is this? And it's still a joke if you need all these actors and all this scamming and so on. But if we consider that only 200-300 years ago, literally almost no one had anything at all, then it puts things into a quite different perspective than if I imagine that, oh no, people had language and culture and everything for 2,000 years in Europe and in America and everything. Yeah, or maybe not America, but depends how then you see the natives and what's going on here. But to me, that makes a big difference, because then it really seems as if the past few hundred years potentially have been true massive development and improvement for the vast majority of the population. And if we want to preserve that and keep that going and let that go further, yeah, again, it's very different than if we imagine that it's already been like this for 2,000 years, then I'd be complaining even louder. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. But like this, I'm like, well, actually, maybe something positive occurred. It's maybe not all bad. And to go deeper into this understanding as to why still there are the obfuscations going on and the different power factions at play. And again, then ultimately just to understand what are the real practical things oneself can do, or where someone should orient themselves to actually make further progress and not be distracted by fake history and other things.
Yeah. 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 I mean, even 100 years ago, there was like nothing in some of those countries, like Egypt and the Middle East and India. That's what David and Morocco, Algeria and those places, and now they have a booming population. But even little more than 100 years ago, there was hardly anything in those places, So it only takes a few generation of people to kind of forget and then reprogrammed, you know and if they tell you that you come from this line of people or that line of people, and then your grandfather might have not bought that, but your grandfather bought it a little bit, and then your father bought it, and then you're going to certainly buy it. So this is how it's working though too.
Yes,
All
exactly.
right. Well, let's bring Manifestifelice. I can never pronounce that right, but Manifestifelice up, and then maybe I will share the link with anybody else who might want to come on up and have a discussion with us. But let's bring him up first. Um, Manifestifelice, are you there with us? Apologize.
Hey guys, no problem.
Alexander.
Hey, how are you doing? I
Hi,
missed you guys.
yeah, good. A long time no see. So I imagine you're doing well.
Yeah, well, relatively speaking, yeah, I just had a relocation, so I'm at my new apartment now, and I actually just handed over the keys to my old one today, so that's finally done. But I had
Okay.
some complications on the way as well, some
Well, I'm
legal
sorry to
issues
hear
with
that.
the new owner. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's not that big a deal, but it's actually kind of, well, it's I don't know, through happenstance I just happened to have the resources to make that all work out, because I got a lawyer, but that was only because it's such a weird story. Like I got fired from my last job, so I got like a huge money injection, so I was able to actually make the move. And then when the landlord started making trouble, I could also afford to get a lawyer, so I'm like in this weird. Now all the money's gone by the way, so I'm just, I just kind of made it like, by a hair's breadth, kind of like that. But I'm happy to be here, and I got a new job now, so I'm working myself up again.
Okay, so I guess the important thing is, are you okay? I guess that's the important thing. Are you doing okay? You feeling
Yeah, I
okay?
mean, I'm doing pretty well actually,
Okay,
considering, and I mean things are looking up.
good.
It's so even if there's like legal, because there might very well be like legal proceedings at some point, but it's mostly in my favor
Hmm.
at this point, from what my lawyer is telling me at least. So I'm pretty optimistic at the moment, but chances are nothing's going to happen anyway. So I think it's just a fart in the wind. but
Okay.
but yeah,
Well, hopefully that's not the case, and things will be to your favor. And I don't know
Mm,
the details of it, and I don't think neither does the audience. But I just hope that everything works out well for you.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think it might be best not to get into the details, at least not publicly. I'll
Right.
just to be on the safe side.
I would say
But
so
yeah,
too.
it's I got the place, I got it on time for my new job, so that's what matters to me. So
Hmm.
you know, it's all good.
Okay. Well, what do you want to bring to the table today?
Well, I'm actually it's funny actually, because I did get some ideas just listening to you guys. So there were a few connections that just a few synapses that just connected in my brain as you were talking, and there was so one of them is like, because I saw the Pathé pictures with the marching band and all that stuff, and I was actually
Hmm.
thinking about how I think that's it's one of the things in mainstream history where they say that the whole thing of military marching bands and stuff is a thing we took from the Muslims as well. And then I started thinking about, we haven't actually talked about guns and stuff, because that's also said that the Ottomans introduced that to Europe, and that's how castles became obsolete and armor became obsolete, because they started firing holes into them with cannons and and muskets and whatnot. Um, which is also an interesting thing, but that also makes me wonder, like, okay, so because we normally, obviously, like, at least according to mainstream history, when we think about the change in technology, let's say, we picture like the Middle Ages being these castles on the hills and stuff, or with the moat and everything, and not as star forts. So the star forts seemed, in mainstream history again, are supposed to be like more advanced technology, and they specifically built them to withstand cannon fire and stuff like that. That's what they say, and also to be able to have cannons like in the whole periphery, let's say, of the fortification, to be able to fire in all directions and stuff like that. But sometimes, or most of the time, actually, it doesn't really make sense, because these things are actually not very close to the sea. So it's kind of a weird thing. So the one I always think about is Fort Bretagne in Groningen in Holland, which is the first star fort I actually learned about. I had no, it's like it. Most people, I think, may be aware of that one, and maybe two or three others. And the story is that they were built specifically by Marquis de Vauban, who was the royal engineer of King Louis the 14th, the Sun King. Was it the 14th? I think it was the 14th. But so, and obviously the mainstream narrative is that they were used as fortifications, and then you had so, for example, in Holland they were used against the Spaniards during the 80 Years' War, against the Spaniards. But again, it's like a weird kind of thing, because actually, if you look at it on the map, maybe I can look it up to show you guys. It's actually nowhere near the sea. Let's see.
I kind of want to have an understanding of like what you're trying to say here. Like, can you
Well,
elaborate? Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So what I'm trying to say is basically, so I'm trying to connect like modern weaponry, cannons, and things like that
Okay. Yeah.
to star forts and to
Okay.
Islam, because we know that the Ottoman Empire introduced cannons to Europe, right? That's a mainstream accepted fact, right? So after the Ottoman Empire came, that's when medieval castles became obsolete. But again, that leaves star forts kind of out of the question, because medieval castles are different than star forts. Medieval castles have vertical walls, and usually they have a moat around them and stuff like that. And in medieval times, you had to besiege them, so they came with those ladders and with all that stuff. So it was a different process, defending and besieging them, than what came after the Ottoman Empire came, when they just brought the cannons and they started bombarding those walls, and they all came tumbling down, right? But so star forts, again in mainstream history, are supposed to be built with that in mind, right? So after black powder became a thing, became the norm, even in the West, they started building new types of fortifications to be able to withstand cannon fire, and also to be able to direct cannon fire better. So
Yeah. So
yeah.
sorry, but I remember like Fominko was talking about the Battle of Kulikovo, where he, I think, was mentioning something about like basically the church um was said like the royal like Christians versus like the Protestant Christians, and they were at war with each other, and that's when the peasants like introduced the cannons, right? And maybe Raphael can chime in on this, but like the initial cannons were like made out of tree trunks or oak trees, and then they
Yeah, I
were
remember that.
modified over time, right? But that was instrumental in winning that battle, because you have the church, um, like the royal church, and they were better armed and they had better military and stuff like that. And then you have these kind of like rebel forces, but they had access to this weaponry, which devastated them. So, Raphael, are you familiar with this at all? Do you know anything about this?
So I don't know what Nosowski says about this. All I remember, first off, is there was a presentation by UAP channel about the
Mhm.
cannons, and here it very much appeared like as if almost all, at least modern recreations of cannons,
Mhm.
literally couldn't even fire a single boulder or whatever the way they would portray it today. So for me, the whole canon thing is a huge question, basically the way it is described here. But also here, maybe we don't know what they originally used, but if you would
Right.
put like a big metal ball in it and big gunpowder, and you have
Yeah.
most of these canon renditions, most of them supposedly, apparently would literally fall apart. There's
Mm.
apparently only one that exists, which is kind of small, that you could actually
Mhm.
fire repeatedly. But to
Mhm.
me, the whole canon thing is a big question. However, what we do have and what is easily
Mhm.
demonstrated today is, as Alexander said, the muskets and now the more modern versions. By the
Mhm.
way, many of your police force weapons are coming from Austria, from Glock, just so you know. Yeah,
Mhm.
Austria,
Mhm.
neutral country, is
And
heavily
Switzerland.
involved in
And
arms
Switzerland
trade.
with Sieg Sauer.
Yes, very good. So this is something we have today. So certainly I would see in terms of technological potential shifts whenever it got introduced, the one thing
Mhm.
would be the Damascus steel, and the other thing would be the gunpowder or whatever types of small arm weapons, which I
Mhm.
can only assume would make a very big difference in any fight. And of course, whoever has access to this, or whoever maybe even only has more bodies they can arm with this, would obviously have a big advantage.
Yeah, talking about Damascus steel, I mean, Damascus, like Moscow, Damascus, Moscow steel. And, like I'm really into like this kind of like Japanese swords, katanas and stuff like that, was very much interested in how they were made. And reading just the kind of the history of like Vikings and how they were trading, so-called Vikings who were trading with the southern Middle Eastern countries, and mainly they were trading for Damascus steel. And the fact of the matter is that, and like even modern steel though too, I mean, it's like there's so many different types of steel, like CPM and like Magna Cut, and there's so many out there. And people who are really into that, it's like, oh, it's got like chromium in it and tungsten in it and all kinds of little metals in it to make it like to be like ideal steel for use. But like back in the day, when people were making like weapons, like the problem was that there was kind of inconsistency to that metal, and then they were prone to breaking, and that's what Damascus steel was able to solve because it was consistent, because the metal is folded over on top of each other, so you are kind of like pounding out the impurities in them. It's kind of like kneading a clay over time, so you get rid of all the bubbles in the same manner, like in the metal. Like when you roll them over and over again, you're getting rid of all the impurities that would actually cause cracks and fissures with a sword. So you don't want a sword that is cracking or breaking in the middle of the battle. So that's a kind of an advantage.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually remembered the connection with the marching bands now, because the idea, at least, again, I'm gonna keep adding the caveats, but I think you understand. I'm talking to mainstream history, though. But basically, the idea is that they were keeping rhythm for reloading the guns. So basically, what they did, I don't know if you've seen how they were doing that in like in the Napoleonic era and stuff like that. You had these rows of riflemen, right? And the first row would shoot, and then they would go to the back, and then as they were moving forwards and the front row was shooting, they were reloading their guns. And so you needed the rhythm to keep the rhythm to actually do all that, because obviously reloading a flintlock, it's a lot more complicated than reloading a modern firearm, right? You just you have to like put in the black powder, I don't know, push it in with this brush, and then put in the thing, and then push it in again and stuff like that. So I mean, there's a logic to it. It's pretty. I think there's something. I honestly do think at least flintlock weapons did work. There's plenty of them around. I mean, here in Greece, there's lots of old people that still have them in their homes and stuff, and you can see how they work basically, and things like that. So I don't think it's too complicated, obviously. But the thing is, like, I don't know how I don't know to what degree it was actually introduced by the Ottomans, and not I don't know, but. I honestly do think that there's another connection as well. So, for example, the saber, the curved sword, we apparently also took from the Muslims.
Yeah, they call it scimitars. I mean, there's like, like scimitars and other names for the curved swords. Like when you look at a lot of the Middle Eastern and like Indian swords, they tend to be curved, and then when you look at the medieval weapons, they tend to be a little bit more straight. Obviously a katana is a curved weapon, but they have, so I mean, they have different purposes, different uses, more for slashing, and
well,
such.
medieval weapons allegedly medieval swords were more focused on stabbing, because you had to get through the creaks in someone's armor and stuff like that. And obviously, if you had an open area, you could still whack them with it. But anyway, I think I'm derailing the conversation a bit now. But yeah, I think there's definitely a connection there to some degree. It's just. But at the same time, I wonder if the Starfort narrative is correct. I don't think it
in
was
what sense,
just
or
well, so the mainstream theory is that it was a fortification, and they were built like so rather than vertical walls, they had these diagonal ones, which were backed up by a lot of earth and more. So they were basically thicker. And they were meant to like withstand cannonballs and things like that. But at the same time, it's a lot easier to just walk up them, stuff like that. But obviously, if you have the higher ground and you could just shoot them down, I don't know. But there seems to be more to them than just that,
One thing a commenter pointed out, which I found interesting, is looking at the architecture. I mean, you're right. There are definitely distinct styles of these fortresses. And I guess I'm not sure even if today we could properly date them and be sure, like, how old is this star fort really? How old is this, vertical castle really? But looking at the star fort architecture or star fort maps, someone said, and I can't say if this is true or not, but he said that actually it makes more sense, the internal architecture of a star fort, or the layout, let's say, of a star fort, if we were to consider it is to defend against, let's say, the beasts, so-called the peasants, the beasts, yeah, outside the walls, rather than for the most of the time defending against other elites. So it very much seems as if there would have been, again, this worldwide empire, let's say, even long time ago, but the empire mainly consisted of all these very small star fort cities, which were trading with each other, maybe sometimes also fighting, but their main opponent may actually just have been, yeah, the roaming beasts, quote unquote, outside the city walls. Where it's also interesting, one thing David brought up is the question, what is the human body really capable of? So he brought these examples of maybe even people living in Korea even, maybe you can attest to this, Nachiketa, that in Seoul even the temperature gets pretty low, and that even there for quite some time people didn't even have clothes. But the open question is, of course, number one, where did most of these naked individuals live? I would assume mainly in warmer climates. However, at the same time, we know from monks and so on and different examples that the human body is capable of a lot. And even recently, I heard stories, someone living in the mountains somewhere, of course, with clothes and stuff and so on, but that the body can even epigenetically, I would say now, however you would call it, change even within a lifetime quite dramatically to adapt. So then assuming that we have generations living naked outside, and there it would really be survival of the fittest, fittest for being naked outside, how much capacity can the body actually have to withstand heat or to withstand cold or to be able to jump high and all of these things. And then again, when David outlined this about, the roaming beasts outside the city walls, it again gave me flashbacks to Shingeki no Kyojin, Attack on Titan, where I'm like, oh, now I understand. I'm not sure if you've ever seen this, Nachiketa, Attack on Titan, the animation.
Not, I mean, I know of it, but I didn't like sit down and watch through them. But I kind of know the gist of it,
Yeah, it's very psychedelic, I would say, especially the first season, and then it gets more interesting because it also relates to this idea of how much of the layout of where you are you actually aware of. It's almost like, do you have a map of the place where you're at? And the story starts without having a map, these people just being protected by 3 layers of walls. And outside, of course, is a huge convoluted story. But the way it appears to me now, again, there's more reality to it than I would like to assume. Not saying that it's exactly like in this animation, of course, but just this idea of having, in this case, it's giants outside the walls. Maybe they weren't giants, but whatever, but really scary individuals. If you put yourself into the position of being a Star Fort City noble with your family, you probably would be very scared of whoever is outside there. And this is kind of sort of depiction, even though it's not exactly like that, but psychologically, there may be more to it than just a pure fiction story.
Right. Yeah. And these people were cannibals, though, too. The people who were living outside the Star Fort. So that is also
Yes.
very scary. Go ahead.
Yeah, it also reminds me of the Wildman. You have this, for example, this tapestry with these black nobles in the castle, and then there's these hairy white people assaulting the castle and stuff, and they're trying to ward them off with bows and arrows and stuff like that. It's an actual medieval tapestry, and they're black, so they're the Moors in the castle and stuff like that. But again, like,
wait, just to be clear, a real
Mhm.
tapestry, and you have black people. I was saying
Yeah, a
black,
real
no?
medieval
Black people
tapestry.
inside and white
Yeah, yeah.
people outside.
It's I saw it for the
Mhm.
first time on Kurimeo House channel. I don't know if you guys follow him. I occasionally watch his stuff. He's pretty interesting because he basically just reads books, So all the stuff is completely like, how do you say? Like it goes against everything the mainstream media or the mainstream history kind of says, but it's all mainstream history. It's all books that he found on the web or found on whatever, and he's just reading it most of the time. But so that let me see. I might be able to find that one. Because but what what that made me think though is like that narrative does make sense. Well, I can show you the link, but the narrative does make sense. But I think it would still be more likely that that would happen like in medieval, or like how we depict at least medieval times with the vertical walls. I think it's much harder for naked men to kind of besiege like a traditional medieval castle than a star fort, because the star fort has sloping walls, so you can still walk up to it. Obviously they can shoot them down or they can poke them down with spears or whatever from the top. You still have the high ground, but obviously they can come at night, or they can come, they're going to have guards, but there might still be like a weak spot or whatever. And obviously, and they all have water ducts and stuff underneath, so you can even go through the channels and stuff like that. And again, they're supposed to be meant to be built to defend against that, right? So they're built on the water to prevent people from entering through the channels and stuff like that. But again, I don't know how if that narrative makes sense either, but but at the same time, yeah, I don't know. But at the same time, it's probably the same elite that at ages later, after the introduction of black powder, started doing it differently. I guess I'm not sure exactly. I don't know if you saw the picture. I just sent it in the chat.
Yes, we have it in the private chat. Thank you. The one thing always reminds me of, again, this is mainland history, is that even officially in Vienna, the Stafford city walls were only deconstructed in the 1870s. And David basically says that, yeah, this was the time after the successful crusade of Mohammed, when they were basically dismantling the walls because they didn't need them anymore, because much of the technology, or even just, basic clothes and basic culture already was available to the masses. So there was nothing particular to protect anymore inside the Stafford city walls, or they found other ways to protect their other technology. But this is when basically the cities opened up. And I guess this is also when the heavy draw towards urbanization really started off, with what we would now call the Industrial Revolution, when, of course, many more people actually came to work in the factories in the cities, also in Europe.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a pretty fascinating idea if you think that Mohammed may have been the one to introduce cannons. It's kind of like. The other thing I wanted to say as well, by the way, I just figured, like, if David is correct about what about the beasts and the peasants, I think that may also be the root of the word bastard, right? Beast. So you have art at the end, which is the type, or the it's from German, you probably know. Eine Art Person, or eine Art I don't know, eine Art Menschen. So they're beast-like. They're beast-like. Yeah. And that's because the nobility started intermixing with the peasants, and we know that happened too. That's also in mainstream history. So that's interesting too. Like there's quite a bit of overlap in that in that regard. There's some tidbits in history, in widely accepted history, that kind of confirm what Fomenko and what David Ewing are saying.
Yes, and one thing maybe that's important for everyone, to look up yourselves as well, is that in one of the recent presentations, David brought up the idea that's also, somewhere noted in mainstream history, or mainstream scholars, or whatever you would call mainstream, that they actually painted over certain medieval depictions to basically make people be dressed, or at some point, maybe from the Renaissance forward, or whatever it is, time-wise, they deliberately depicted the medieval general population to have clothes and culture. But this may just be a backdating of what they again wanted people to believe. Just like now, like I said, you have people going around saying like, oh, my ancestors for hundreds of years have had this and that religion and all of that, and they were so cultured, when maybe that wasn't the case at all. And if it is true that certain depictions were just painted over, that would be, of course, an obvious hint at backdating this cultural development.
It's funny too, but because even without that, there's plenty of, especially Renaissance art and stuff. There's so much imagery of naked people. Like, come on, like if you go to the Louvre, you will see it everywhere, and it's all like this bohemian, innocent,
Yes.
kind of like dancing in the woods and stuff like that, and it's all romanticized, and all like idealized human bodies and stuff like that, which is also kind of strange because like is that the elite imagining themselves in like the state of the lower ranks of the people, or is that them? Because you have, for example, you also have like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, right? And he talks about the noble savage and stuff like that, and the state of nature before we introduced like the social contract and stuff like that. And he's also considered a romantic, basically a romantic philosopher. So this whole notion of romanticism and the bohemians and the dandies and all that stuff, who were basically, it seems, were elite people, or like, affiliated to the elite at the very least, who were kind of looking at kind of like the grass is greener on the other side. They were kind of, which is kind of weird if you think about it. They were jealous of the people who were living naked in the woods.
It could be this, or it could just have been the first, let's say, elite spokesperson group of the hybridized, bastard hybrids, let's say, because it appears even many of those revolutionaries, of course, were only in the position because they themselves were related or affiliated to the elite. And then maybe they simply wanted to whitewash the story of, half their ancestors, if they are, let's say, outer Starford Wall beast and inner Starford Wall noble hybrids, not to say bastards, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just, speculating, but
that
this
might
is
be
interesting.
one thing, or it might be because they already started educating people and they had already, so you had, all the programs had begun basically to inform people, and maybe they were like a rogue kind of faction that were trying to kind of push them away again, by idealizing their previous living conditions and stuff like that, or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's all possible. Yeah.
Do you agree? I don't know how much have you been following what we presented today, Alexander, but is there some things that you agree or disagree with the narrative that we have been presenting?
No, not necessarily. I mean, so far, I mean, I've been up with the narrative with the Muslim connection, let's say, and especially in America, and all that stuff for a while now. I mean, the thing is, like, we don't know what conclusions we need to draw from this, but that's a different story. I
What
think that's where
conclusions do you draw?
Well, I mean, it's more a question of where do we go from there? Like, assuming that is all true,
That's a
does
good
that
question.
change what we're here to do? Let's say, or does it change? Because most people aren't aware of that, and is it? Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's something that everyone needs to know per se. Not that they shouldn't, or not that it wouldn't be good if they did.
Okay.
But I mean, is it is it necessary for us to start building a better world? Let's say, I mean, I think it's necessary to that degree to to accept our differences, or to like accept the fact that we're actually not as different as we might think, more likely.
Okay.
But
So
I think
like
most people
just
generally
to
have this
just to
disposition
make it
anyway.
clear, like I just want to make sure that I understand you correctly. You're saying like, maybe this information is true, maybe it's not true. We don't really fully know, but is it
Mm.
necessary for people to all come to know about it because it seems so convoluted and getting to the bottom of it? It seems like, is it at all like beneficial towards like when are you saying that it is like more important to focus on like how we should be moving forward and where we should give our
Maybe.
attention to like to make a better society? Is that what I'm
Yeah,
understanding?
maybe, but maybe
Okay.
for not for everyone, maybe that's not necessarily what. But like, okay, so for people like like us, for better lack of a
Okay.
better term, who are hip to
You
the
and I
story.
and
Yeah,
Raphael, like,
exactly. And
okay.
the people in the chat and people who are following this, and obviously also people who are engaged with other aspects of this whole truth and alternate history thing.
Okay.
It might be useful knowledge in the sense that it gives you a perspective, and you can play with more like ethical constructs, more philosophies, more and see how they connect with each other and stuff like that, and
Okay.
see if there's anything we can learn or we can teach people or whatever.
Mhm. But
But most people, I don't know, most people don't have the time to do all that. I don't know, and
oh,
I
okay,
think at,
okay.
at the same
Yeah,
time,
yeah, yeah.
most people have a friendly disposition. Well, not all, but most people are at least trying. And I
Yeah.
think we can also trust our human nature. And at the same time, because I have to admit, like what David Ewing did make me think about. Okay, it is true that the elite have been, or the elite, or like our education system, or what our society has been feeding us, has been dressing us, has been making sure that we're all able to live in a
We should be
home,
grateful to
and,
them.
and well,
We should be
yeah,
grateful to
well,
them.
we should, yeah, maybe we should, maybe we should be grateful to the fact that all this is possible, and at least to some unknown, unnamed agent, let's say,
Yeah.
we
Mhm.
can say it's God. That might be the easiest way to do it, because at least, if nothing else, you could say God has made sure that there are people that are trying to do good in the world, and that are trying to help people, and that are trying to set up a system that will help all of us to attain at least the bare minimum, to be able to survive like in relative comfort, and have all the knowledge to improve our lives and improve the lives of those around us and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
obviously not
Okay.
everyone's going to do that, and we have free will and stuff like that, but I think
Mhm.
that's what we should be trying to do.
Can
And I
you
think
can you
that's
tell me what we
yeah.
should be doing? Can you just like really clarify what we should be doing? Like what should we be doing? Because like what I'm understanding is that some of this information is very subjective. I mean, like it
Well, I
can be
know, I
true,
know,
but
I know that.
you have to be like you have to sparse through a lot of information to
Mm,
you're going through like a bunch of hay to find that
I
gold or
know.
whatever. I mean, it's so
And obviously, and I
like
don't want to tell anyone what to do, right? So let that be
no, no, no.
completely
I'm
clear,
asking
But
your genuine opinion on the matter because, like,
no.
I'm walking down the logic and the thought process of Alexander, and
Mm,
it's not to put you on the spot, but you're up here, and then we're having a conversation. So in my mind, like I want to ask you, like, okay, in your perspective, okay, like this is kind of like what and some of it is good, some of it is important, some of it is like kind of like interesting and stuff like this. But the average Joe out there, like you said, unless you're like crazy about history like us, they don't really have time for all this stuff.
mm.
They don't have time for all this stuff, so they don't have time to sparse through all this. So we should just maybe write a short little, 2-page like thing about history and tell them this is the way it is, take it or leave it, and then and then be done with it, right?
Well, I don't know if history is even all that necessary altogether, because it's
Okay.
like a friend once told me, like the only people who want to have history are the ones who want to be in control. It's like
Okay. Hmm.
and and it's the same here. Like I see it in Greece all the time. Like people put so much stock in their history and their ancestry and stuff like that, but they don't look at themselves, and it's like,
Mm.
yeah, okay, but like where do you even fit in this whole thing? Like what are you doing to how do you say, to honor that, to honor your ancestors, or to continue that
Okay.
legacy, or to improve what they have left behind, stuff like that. Even if that were true, which I'm like kind of iffy about, but so for most people, and the reality is, I think for most people, that they, even if they have a like like education and things like that, most people are not daily aware of their history and stuff like that. So in reality,
Right.
I think most people are just kind of trying to find common play, how do you say, commonalities, or like common ground with the people around them, and trying to make things work. And and obviously we're still just human, and we're still going to make mistakes, and we're still
Okay.
um
These are just general statements. I mean, this is all
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
true in general. I mean, I
yeah.
can't disagree with the fact that we make mistakes and we're just human beings, and we live normal lives, whatever, whatever. But like
Mm.
like I just want to know, like in your mind, like what should we be doing? What do you think it's like what's the point of doing any of this at all? Like having this conversation or whatnot. So like
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I think we want to improve ourselves, and I mean the way
okay.
to do that is to just stay, stay active, keep an open
Okay.
mind, keep listening, and also,
Uh-huh.
have a baseline of gratefulness, but not too much at the same time. You still got to stand up for yourself as well. So
Yeah.
there's a lot, and it's like the way I see, like
Don't be
my
too grateful. Don't be too
yeah,
grateful, right?
yeah, I mean, I still had to I still had to fight for this home. It's like, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I'm sorry I had to hurt this guy, but yeah, I mean, not physically, but I still had to do it.
Yeah.
Um, but my how do you say, my philosopher of choice in that regard when it comes to ethics and stuff like that is Aristotle, and he's basically the one who uh, talked about like finding the golden mean, between two
Mm.
extremes. And the
Mhm.
golden mean is basically, it's not virtue itself, but it's like your safest direction towards virtue. And obviously, depending on the situation, in some cases you might have to be a bit more brave than cowardly. Let's say there's like
Mhm.
kind of a middle ground, but you can't be foolhardy. But like maybe
Mhm.
sometimes you need to jump into deep waters, and other times it might be best for you to withdraw. Let's say. So that's one example. But like
Right.
every
Be wise. Be
situation has
wise
like
about your
these.
action. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. And the way to get there, I mean, the Tao Te Ching talks the same way about it. The wise man doesn't have to have all this knowledge about what the Tao is. The one who understands the Tao doesn't understand the Tao, and stuff like that. And it's
Mhm.
kind of trying to get you to that mindset, because you can ask me what we should do, but I can't really tell you. But
I can
those
only
books
tell you
are
what
doing
we
the same
should do.
thing.
I
Yeah,
I can ask
yeah.
you all day about what we should do, but I can only tell you what we should not do, right?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, yeah. Well, I could tell you maybe in some situations what you should do. Like, for example, if you ask me, like, now I work at Dyson, so if you ask me, like, how I should, my machine doesn't work anymore. So I could tell you maybe what you need to do to make it work again, or to see if it will work. And if not, I can
Okay.
do something else for you, stuff like that. But or like in any other specialization, right? You might be an architect, and you might know what to do to, I don't know, stabilize like a building or whatever, or all that stuff.
Okay.
But you can't know everything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess like at least in this conversation that I like, I just have I want more clarity, at least coming from you about like because like
Mhm.
we're talking about like hidden histories and stuff like this,
Yeah.
and kind of the conventional narrative that's been given to humanity to obfuscate, the history. That's the way I look at it. And so what Fomenko and Novsivsky and David Ewing Jr. and other people, like what we are attempting to do is to educate ourselves, and hopefully by virtue of just educating ourselves, we share that information with the rest of the population to give them this kind of understanding that there's something big happening, that is beyond any one of us in a way. And yes, there's a lot of nuances to history, and some of it we don't, maybe we'll never know what exactly has happened. But I can only say is that whatever that they told us about the conventional history of Jesus coming around like 2000 years ago, and ancient Egypt was like, 6000 years ago, and ancient Greece and all this kind of stuff, probably most likely did not exist the way they have told us. So that then, um, you know, so like falsification or like countering that narrative becomes the first thing. Like, is it true? Is it not true? Right? In my mind. And then you're coming to the conclusion that all the evidence is pointing to the fact that this is not true. Now, with that, that doesn't mean we necessarily have to like replace that history, but we have to bring the evidence and show like, hey, what else could have actually occurred. And that's what a lot of the conversations about it, they to me anyway, of like, the invention of Quran, in India and stuff like that, and that being brought to Egypt, and then the Quran also being brought to like Morocco and Algeria. So there's like, a lot of different factions, and like, what is the right way to put it? Like this is not like conspiracy. It's kind of a conspiracy. It's intrigue.
Yeah.
Talking about all this kind of stuff. Go ahead, Raphael.
So, would you like my answer to the question?
Yeah.
So my perception is, I just wrote this down, that basically, if any of what we're discussing here in this alternative views is correct, then it very much appears as if the egalitarian revolution led by, just as placeholder names, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, has been hidden, has been slandered, has been obfuscated, and where this wasn't possible or enough, it has been hijacked, creating all kinds of mythological ideas about all of them, attributing all kinds of things. I was just for some reason now thinking of Jesus died on the cross for your sins. Okay, well, that story may be correct or not. The Quran says something different. But what if it's different? What if Jesus lived, does not even talk about his death, he lived and was fighting for you to have clothes and language? Isn't that more important or relevant? To me, it would be. I'm like, that's, but what is my sin? I don't even know what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's
But for
definitely
me
what
to
he
have,
did. Yeah.
but for me to have clothes or language, or, not to live in the dirt and engage in cannibalism, to me, that's more important than anything else I ever heard about Jesus from mainline Christianity. So that's the one thing. And also because even still today, I don't know how many people are political. I don't know in America how many people really engage with this. Of course, social media and the TV will amplify it to 10,000%, but still there's a few percent that are actively involved in these processes, and directly, indirectly, subtle or not so subtle, they do have some effect on the disposition and the mood and the well-being of all the other people in all the other countries. And what we can do here, for example, like David Ewing Jr. has shown, if we understand a bit more clearly what the background factions are, and this history of Zionism, for example, and anti-Zionism, Sunniism, and so on, if everyone tomorrow were hip to these ideas, I don't see so many people anymore in any way, shape, or form giving support to any of the crazy, let's say, New World Order plans or whatever it would be. So from that point of view, having this rear view mirror and being able to at least connect a few dots to the present day, because the very same agenda apparently is still going on. So as much as we can say, oh, it's a thing of the past, it's more important what you do and how you are today, I agree. But at least to anyone in any way, shape, or form influenced by all of these modern day political streams, it would be very important to understand, because then you can disentangle yourself from it and you can have a clear view in terms of, okay, what do I really want for my life, for my family, and whoever else is coming after me? If I can clearly see the lineage and the progression of what actually happened, that's the way in which I would say it's important to me.
Okay.
Yeah, you may be right. And I mean, I kind of see it the same way, you know. Sorry, my goal has always been to kind of to see how I can live up to the legacy that I've found I have. I mean, I just had this upbringing and this kind of way of thinking, and it's kind of, and it's always kind of bothered me, I guess, that I couldn't do anything about it, And I mean, I don't know. Maybe maybe it's not up to me to decide, even. Um, I don't know if I should derail the conversation further, honestly, because I might, if I, I don't know. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I mean,
what I
like,
would say,
feel free. Yeah,
please
go
go
ahead.
on.
Well, because the thing is, like I grew up with the, my mom's always told me like we're of noble blood, like my ancestors, and I've looked into it, like I've researched the whole history of my ancestry and stuff. They're they were knights in the Middle Ages and stuff like that, and they were involved in similar, like in vendettas, in feuds with other knightly houses in the Netherlands. Specifically the House of Holland, by the way, which I always find funny because that's what the Netherlands are called nowadays, And but and they well, it's like a whole thing, because if there was like a whole, how do you say, scandal, because they basically abducted the Count of Holland at some point and ended up killing him, but not they directly. And it was like a whole series of events that led up to it, and it's actually a really tragic story because they actually had good intentions, and that's one of those things that keeps messing me up, because I try to do good as well, but I keep getting into trouble and I keep getting misunderstood, and there's this kind of thing. And I have to wonder if that's how a lot of these people feel as well, a lot of the nobility and stuff like that. And obviously we can't, there's still, obviously there's still factionalism, and there's still people that are definitely doing evil things. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of them that, in their mind at least, are trying to do good. And that's funny too, because it's you see that a lot in movies, right? So they project themselves in movies and in comics and in stories and stuff like that. So the tragic villain is always like a big kind of trope, and it's a beloved trope. We do enjoy it when you have a cool story for a bad guy, like he has like, you understand why he became that way, and it's the same thing. And it's funny too, because Aristotle talks about tragedy as well, and it's the same thing. It's catharsis, so you see how certain events are irreversible because of certain things, because like laws and traditions and things like that. So you have the story of Antigone, for example, and like her brother went to war even though his uncle told him not to, and he died in battle. But he has to be buried because he's he died in battle, but his uncle refuses to bury him because he was excommunicated. He disobeyed him, and so there were two conflicting traditions. And Antigone ends up burying him and gets buried with him because she did that. So, and that whole story is like, people understand why this happens and why that happens and why it had to happen this way, and because of that reason they get to a epiphany, right? A moment of catharsis, that's how he calls it, where you basically have this emotional connection to the protagonist of the story and to all the characters actually of the story and stuff like that, and it's kind of like, I feel like the real purpose that we have in life is to live our story like that, and I'm not talking, it doesn't have to be tragic. There's different, everyone has a different path, let's say, but you do want to be like an example to others, you want to set an example. I think that's the most important thing, and we want to learn from our ancestors' example and from those who came before us, Uh, I think I think I'm getting there. Yeah.
So maybe the last thing I'd say, now that you spoke about this and the examples, what it may actually lead to ultimately is more compassion. So on the one hand, understanding that most of us anyhow, probably by birth, are very much on the same, bastardized side anyways. But even, at least for me, it's incredibly interesting to understand the motives and thought processes and emotions and tragedies and maybe even mental illness or whatever, I'm not exactly sure on that yet, of any supposed elite, to better understand why did they act in this way? Why are there different factions? Why are some people still afraid of the beasts, even though they're now wearing clothes, So I think it can help with that. And also, most certainly, it can help anyone to understand this more if in any way, shape, or form they were influenced by nationalism or anything else like that. Because again, I'm pretty sure if many people would understand this and understand the implications of it, then who would be joining a military or anything along those lines? We're just like, please, any elite factions, you want to hit each other over the head, go ahead, but I'm not going to assist you. Yeah. And the thing would be over very quickly, just as one romanticized example. But of course, in our small world with our small decisions, we can still choose our own alignment and then through our actions assist, one way or another. And I guess at least for me, it's pretty clear. Obviously, I'm more interested in the egalitarian view. But again, even if it was a completely self-serving perspective, because I just wouldn't trust any security mechanism to keep any poor individuals or whatever at bay. Or on the other hand, who is really so heartless, like you have in some Asian countries or wherever? I'm sure, Roland Nachikete, you know more about this than me even. I mean, not even, but certainly, or anyone who has traveled in poorer countries, which I didn't do so much. But do you really want to live in like a super high-tech guarded thing? And every time you go outside, you see people begging and they have no shoes? I mean, even just for my personal well-being, I would not want to see that. Yeah. So, and here everyone can choose along which lines they prefer to act, and therefore also whatever small, apparently small influence that is, the butterfly wing, right? And the repercussions it will have. But once I have some idea about which possibilities I have and how which aspect is related to history and also to present day, then I can at least clearly make a choice and understand what I'm acting towards, instead of just being blind and brainwashed and doing whatever the new master is telling me. So I can have at least some agency in terms of my own life, and ideally also in terms of what is going to happen in the future.
Yeah, let me just chime in real quick. As far as like nobility and all that is concerned, like it's about behavior. Like you can come from like good stock and then be a bad person, and you can come from not so good stock and be a good person. It's always about you know, like having some understanding of like ethics and morality and, doing the best that you can and being the best individual that you can possibly be. But, God made us who we are. I mean, like we're given what we're given. I mean, some people are going to be more intelligent or stronger or whatever than, some other people. I mean, comparatively speaking, there's a bell curve to this reality, and we cannot, run away from it. But, uh, like that's fine. Like, when we are in competition of playing tennis or basketball, somebody can dunk better or somebody can make shots better, and that's great. I think there's room for sports. Chess, I like chess, and I'm never going to be a grandmaster, but I can respect the people who put in their time and energy to become grandmasters. And even among the grandmasters, there are super GMs, where nobody can touch it either. So it's just an expression of how sharp a human being can be. But even that, with a whole of like AI, is showing us the limitation that humans have compared to artificial intelligences and what they can achieve. But as far as like nobility is concerned, it's about like how you conduct yourself. And that's what's the most
Absolutely.
important thing. Like if you don't conduct yourself in the right way, I don't care how smart you are, or how handsome you are, or how intelligent you are still an ass. So that's all it comes out to, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's funny too though, because speaking of that bastardized nature of humanity at this point, I do think it's funny how, like, everyone has an ego, and everyone thinks they know it all, and everything, and it's kind of in our nature too, it's but at the same time, I
Everyone,
think.
or
Well,
everyone, not
I
everyone.
definitely
I
do,
mean, like,
to some degree.
yeah. So you're projecting. You're projecting because you feel and think that way
Yeah,
that
for sure.
everybody else must be, right?
Absolutely, yeah. No, but I mean, you see it. I mean, sometimes you see it. Not everyone does it, or not everyone. Most people, because at the same time, obviously, you also learn to not do that, right? It's one of the biggest things, and I mean, the whole thing about etiquette and stuff is about being humble and knowing your place, and being friendly, at the very least, like being just formally friendly to people. You don't even have to be like honest, or like, how do you say, genuine about it, but like, it's the bare minimum, people know you're a hypocrite, but it's fine, we accept it because everyone is kind of like that, or at least we accept that you have those days where you're just not in the moods,
I think
but
it's
you're still
important to be
trying.
polite. I think it's
Exactly.
important to be
Yeah, that's the
polite,
word I
and
was looking for. I
right,
couldn't find it.
yeah, and then you don't. I mean, maybe there are occasions where we might hold somebody in contempt or whatever, but politeness is important, and I think being genuine is also important. So finding that balance where, like, if you genuinely feel like you want to say some negative things about somebody, I guess go ahead, but then it better be for a good reason as to why you do that.
Yeah,
Whatever. So,
exactly. Yeah.
but like, you know, as far as like conduct and like knowing every see, this is where I think kind of Dunning Kruger thing kind of comes in. Is that like people who um think that they got it all right tend to be the ones who get everything wrong. You know what I mean? And then the people who think that, well, I'm not entirely sure about like, what's going on or whatever, tend to be a little bit more accurate in their assessment because it's about self-awareness, of how well you are able to, let's say, answer these questions or solve an issue, is that you're
Mm.
more
You're more
objective.
inclined to think about it, and
Yeah.
how do you
You're
say,
not
to
arrogant.
invest yourself.
You're not arrogant.
Mm.
You're not so prideful or arrogant to think that you got it all figured out. I mean,
Yeah.
you know
It's funny too. Like, I don't know if that was the Dunning Kruger, or I think that's something else. But like, there's been like studies where like people who were professionals at something and who had lots of experience were actually more absent-minded and more prone to making mistakes than people who were new at the job. That are still kind of trying to figure things out and taking a bit more time and kind of second guessing themselves and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Pretty
Dunning
funny.
Kruger is when people are given a test, and then those people who thought that they did well on the test tend not to have done well on the test, and those people who were like not entirely sure whether they did well on the test actually did better than those who thought that they did well on the test. That's what a Dunning Kruger is. So it's a common trope, or
Yeah, it's
actually a
pretty
way to
similar.
slander people and said that you are a Kruger because you think that you know something when you actually don't, because you're so
Yeah.
confident in something. That's uh, a narrative that people would say about somebody else. It gets used a lot in the flat earth community. But
Mm.
let's start winding it down. So I want to give you, Alexander, a chance to have some closing thoughts for us, and then Raphael, and then we'll get on out of here.
Well, closing thoughts. Ooh. Well, I think it's funny. Like, I've had this discussion with some friends at university and stuff. It's funny how we got to gratitude and stuff like that. Because like, I've had people who were kind of resentful in college and stuff like that, who had adopted this philosophy of like not um kind of caring what the world thinks anymore, or something like that, and not, like, why should I be grateful? Like, I've had to work my ass off to get everything I had and stuff like that. And I mean, there's a core of truth to that, but I think there's something to be said for still being grateful for what you have. I guess that's a good message for me to end on.
Yeah, but don't be too grateful, though, right?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Be
Well, I
grateful, but
mean,
don't be too grateful.
everything within reason. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, I appreciate that, and thank you very much for joining us today, Alexander. And it's been a while,
Yeah,
and I
thank you
hope
too.
Everything works out for you. And
Hope
like as long as you can get online and then talk about your issues, that becomes like a first world problems, right? Of being able to
exactly.
have
Maybe I should
internet.
do that more. Yeah.
Right. But good to see you, man. And it's
Yeah.
hope to
Likewise.
see you again. And thanks for coming up. Raphael, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, well, let's find the golden mean if that's a thing and if that's really desirable. The last tidbit I want to throw out is the Sen Sunni Wanderers. We had a few more links we didn't bring up because it would have been too much. The Sen Sunni Wanderers from Dune, where it makes me wonder, are they the Zion Sunni Wanderers? So again, showing this strange interconnection. And we have brought up Dune before, that it seems to be also very interesting with potentially more truth in terms of real history than just being entirely a fictionalized account. Other than that, yeah, I'd agree with the gratefulness. It's always good to remind ourselves, especially anyone having a computer and internet access, and especially if it's true that a lot of the technological and societal, cultural development we've had for society at large really is a recent thing. Other than that, I can just thank everyone for their interest. If you want to support, the links were posted in the chat. I thank you, Nach, for hosting as always. Thank you, Alexander, for joining. Yeah, and everyone, make up your own minds as always. If you have something interesting, some insights, kindly comment them. And thank you very much.
Yeah, go ahead. Did you want to say something, Alexander?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, guys. It's been a lot of fun, and I'll be around. So I'm looking forward to the next time.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I am just absolutely enamored with the recent Dune, kind of, revisited movies. I think they're done quite well, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. Because like the whole saga is absolutely amazing. And so far as the next saga is concerned, or the next movie, that's the Dune Emperor. Where Paul Atreides becomes the Emperor of Dune, and I'm wondering how they're going to turn him into this God Emperor of Dune. This a worm mixture of human beings. So hopefully we'll get to be able to see that, because I think the first two were really well done, and they're very they're good homage to the books themselves, and the issues that they've had before is that the vision that Frank Herbert had within Dune was difficult to express in movies, and maybe the technology wasn't able to be there to be able to do it. But now we have CGI and all this kind of stuff that we are able to better do it. Go ahead.
It was good enough for the moon landings, though.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
for
other than
sure. Let's
that, I
not
just
mention
have to
that.
ask, did you see Dune Prophecy? Because I think it's quite well done. This is a
Yep.
series. Yeah, because with these things, I'm always happy when they then just do episodic TV, because then it's not just 1-2 hour chunk where they invest so much money and it's often good, but okay. But this one I
Yep.
also really enjoyed. Anyone who likes Dune Prophecy and Children of Dune, I can highly recommend the miniseries from 2000. So yeah.
Yep.
And David
Yep,
Lynch's
absolutely.
movie. Well, we should definitely do like a sci-fi geek out session. Like,
Yeah, but
it's one
David
of my
Lynch
great
was not very
passions. Yeah.
happy with his movie. He
I
was
know,
very
yeah. But it's
dissatisfied
still
with
it's still a lot of fun. I don't know. I just
because he was rushed, and there's budget issues, and he couldn't do everything that he wanted to do, so he had to just pack everything in that one movie. I mean, like, he put everything in there, like the first two movies in now is he had to do everything all now in one movie, so that was kind of
yeah,
hard.
exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, we better get going on it before we start geeking out about stuff. And we'll,
Yeah,
we'll
exactly.
meet again, everybody. And thanks, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you guys all next time. Take care. Bye for now.